The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. And welcome back to our Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading From Devil's Bargain by Joshua Green, the subtitle Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the Storming of the Presidency. This is from the afterword, the very last chapter. It's titled Kali Yuga, which in Hinduism is when the earth goes into a phase of destruction. In the shell-shocked aftermath of the election, President Obama, looking shaken, appeared in the White House Rose Garden to deliver public remarks intended to project a sense of calm. A sense, really, that the basic stability of our country remained intact. Sun is up, Obama said. I know everybody had a long night. I did as well. Had a chance to talk to President-elect Trump last night about 3:30 in the morning, I think it was, to congratulate him on winning the election. End of quote. The next day, when the two men appeared together in the Oval Office, it felt as if the world had slipped through the looking glass. Trump quickly named Bannon his chief White House strategist. Republicans controlled every branch of government. With Trump's ability to defy every political norm, anything seemed possible. Who could argue otherwise after what had just transpired? And yet, within days of his inauguration, Trump's White House was plunged into chaos and scandal from which it has not recovered and may never. Bannon, the imaginative reconceiver of U.S. politics, hung streams of paper listing Trump's promises from the walls of his West Wing office. His strategy, as always, was to launch furious attacks, this time to, quote, shock the system, end quote, and rapidly reorient the federal government in a more nationalist direction. He called this, with what I took to be intentional irony, a shock and awe approach to asserting Trump's power. But Trump's flurry of activity quickly ran into problems. There was his executive order, sprung a week after his inauguration, banning immigrants from 7 majority Muslim countries, which set off nationwide protests and was blocked by the courts. His firing 2 weeks later of National Security Director Michael Flynn for contacts with the Russians. The collapse of his first major legislative initiative, a bill to repeal Obamacare. His firing of FBI Director James Comey. And the swift descent of the West Wing into a viper's nest of backstabbing and leaks. This quick turn toward a crack-up was hardly unforeseeable or even altogether surprising, but it contrasted sharply with the success of a candidate who had dominated his opponents, shaped news coverage, and shown himself to be all but impervious to the forces that overwhelm other politicians. Bannon, whose wild gambits in the campaign had invariably paid off, seemed to run out of magic tricks when Hillary Clinton was no longer a target. The government wasn't as malleable to Trump and Bannon's aggressions as the Republican Party and the cable news channels had been. And they found themselves consistently thwarted and undermined by the courts, by right-wing hardliners in Congress, by their own inexperience and Trump's errant tweets, and by the bureaucracy they were now overseeing. The crises these failures precipitated in the White House cost Bannon much of his influence and soon threatened Trump's presidency. While still early in his term, the possibilities that Trump's most ardent supporters once imagined for his presidency already seem to be mostly foreclosed. I think there are 3 main reasons why Trump's administration has so quickly fallen into disorder and confusion. Number 1, Trump thought being president was about asserting dominance. Just after he'd locked up the GOP nominations, Trump said something to me that crystallized his view of politics and explains, to my mind, much of his subsequent difficulties. Quote, I deal with people that are very extraordinarily talented people, he told me. I deal with Steve Wynn. I deal with Carl Icahn. I deal with killers that blow these politicians away. It's not even the same category. This, he meant politics, This is a category that's like 19 levels lower. You understand what I'm saying? Brilliant killers. Trump was equating politics with business and the presidency with the job of being a big shot CEO, a killer. He filled the upper ranks of his administration with people of a similar mindset. Gary Cohn, Wilbur Ross, Steve Bannon, aggressive, domineering men accustomed to getting their way by dint of their position. None had government experience, nor did many others in the West Wing. So none anticipated the problems this approach to governing would cause. Trump's self-conception as the all-powerful apprentice boss blinded him to a fundamental truth of the modern presidency, that the president needs Congress more than the Congress needs the president. Trump's domineering instinct served him poorly, since most members of Congress are secure in their jobs and accountable mainly to their own constituents. And it backfired disastrously when Trump fired Comey after he refused to submit to a pledge of loyalty to his boss. Number two, Trump ran against the Republican Party, Wall Street, and Paul Ryan, but then took up their agenda. Populists often struggle to govern, but Trump scarcely attempted to lead the populist revolution that he promised. In May, he told me he would transform the Republican Party into a workers' party. But while he kept voicing populist shibboleths, the legislative agenda he took up was the standard conservative fare pushed by Paul Ryan. During the GOP primary, Trump has shrewdly sensed its weak point, Ryan's desire to finance tax cuts for the rich by cutting programs like Social Security and Medicaid, harmed the party's white blue-collar base. Trump told me he'd made this point to Ryan directly. He said, quote, "There's no way a Republican is going to beat a Democrat when the Republican is saying we're going to cut your Social Security, and the Democrat is saying we're going to keep it and give you more." The book is Devil's Bargain by Joshua Green, Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the Storm of the Presidency.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
My friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Blue is in the studio with me. Hello, Blue. And we finally got our set together. But, you know, after the moving disaster, man, that was incredible. In the third hour of our program, Dr. Richard Wolff is going to be with us. We're going to be talking about the economy, the crises of capitalism, and the Fed chair that Donald Trump, in all probability today, is going to announce. It's been pre-announced. So there's that. Donna Brazil has written a rather amazing piece for Politico. And this is going to be, I suspect, a big deal inside the Democratic Party, the comments that Donna Brazil is making. And I think on the one hand it should be, but on the other hand, we have to be very careful not to go into circular firing squad mode and not to, you know, these are cliches, throw the baby out with the bathwater, whatever. I mean, you know, to actually understand what happened. The essence of what Donna Brazil is saying, and then I'm going to get into what Roy Moore is saying, which is, you know, the contrast to the Democratic Party, the craziness in the Republican Party. But anyhow, the essence of what Donna Brazil is saying is that in traditional campaigns, when the incumbent is not up for re-election, you know, when Barack Obama was up for re-election in 2012, there was no doubt who was going to be on the ticket. And so the Obama campaign basically controlled the DNC. When Bill Clinton was up for re-election in 1996, the Clinton campaign controlled the DNC. But when a candidate is not up for re-election, the way it typically works is that the political parties, DNC, RNC, that the party does not turn itself over to the control of an individual political candidate until that candidate has been nominated at the convention. And Donna Brazil points out when she ran Al Gore's campaign in 2000, that it wasn't until right after the convention in July of 2000 that Al Gore started putting his people in the DNC. And that what happened in this case, according to Donna Brazil, according to this piece in Politico, which is just fairly shocking, frankly, on the one hand. On the other hand, it's perfectly reasonable. I mean, you could build a case on either side of this, and she doesn't build the reasonable case in this article, which I thought it was interesting. And I think that's because, you know, Donna Brazile was just given back a position in a senior management position in the DNC by Tom Perez. And a lot of people are giving Tom Perez all kinds of grief for that, and presumably giving Donna Brazile grief for it because she was painted as being part of the in-crowd with Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who basically, you know, screwed Bernie and operated on behalf of Hillary before she won the nomination. And what Brazile points out in the article was, yeah, in fact, you know, almost a year before the nomination was locked up, Hillary Clinton's campaign took control of the DNC, functional control. And she lays out how it happened and what the agreement is and all this kind of stuff, and says she's horrified by it. And she was in tears, and she was calling Bernie to explain to him, yes, it was rigged, here's how it was rigged. Now that's the oh my God, the evil Clinton side of it, essentially. But the flip side of that would be a year before, now we're talking the middle of 2015, right? A year before the nomination was nailed down, there were no serious challengers to Hillary Clinton. There was no belief within the Democratic Party that anybody was going to challenge her, and frankly, nobody did except Bernie. There was, you know, that was of any consequence. Yeah, Martin O'Malley did, but you know, there were no consequential challenges. And so, if you're looking at this from the point of view of either somebody in the Clinton campaign or somebody in the DNC at that point in time in 2015, you might rationally and reasonably say, you know, Hillary Clinton's going to be the nominee, and it's really important that we get a Democrat in the White House. So let's just start acting as if she was the nominee. In fact, let's move that process. Let's jumpstart that process by a year. Now, I agree with Donna Brazile. It's not the way it should happen. It's not what should have happened. It is what did happen, and it was wrong. We would not know this had Bernie not been in the campaign, frankly, and you know, it's particularly poignant in light of the studies that were published earlier in the week suggesting or showing that had Bernie run against Donald Trump, he would have easily beat him. Now, I realize that even saying that, you know, cranks up a whole bunch of people who say, yeah, but, you know, he never was seriously challenged, and we never really saw the Apple research. And, yeah, well, I've seen it. And I still think Bernie would have eaten Trump's lunch. I mean, look at what Trump had going for him, right? He grabs women's crotches and all this other stuff. I mean, seriously? So, anyhow, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, to see if the Democratic Party takes this information and decides with this information that they're going to make the Democratic Party more transparent and more responsive, excuse me. Or if they're going to go into insulated mode. I think it's on the verge of breaking open. I think that this is a good thing. I think it's a good thing for political parties to overcome stasis and to overcome stagnance or stagnant. What is the word? You know, becoming stagnant, and periodically, you know, this is a variation on Jefferson's suggestion that, you know, every generation should reinvent the Constitution, that there should be a political revolution in the United States every 18 to 20 years. And that's what I see happening right now. And I see this revolution happening inside the Democratic Party. Now, the Republican Party's had a revolution as well. It's been taken over by a group of plutocratic fossil fuel billionaires, largely fossil fuel. There's also gambling billionaires and other kinds of billionaires, but the fossil fuel billionaires are really running the show. At least, you know, that's how it looks from the outside. So, you know, the Republican Party has had their revolution, and they're going down this path of more and more authoritarianism. The Democratic Party is walking back from authoritarianism, which I think is a great thing. The other thing I wanted to talk about is Roy Moore. Judge Roy Moore says that religious liberty comes from God, not the Constitution. Why is it that in those countries where religious liberty doesn't exist, that they talk mostly about God? And in those countries where religious liberty does exist, they have essentially strong constitutions, for lack of a better phrase. And what about that suggestion of Roy Moore's that our rights come from God and not the Constitution, including our religious liberty rights? Is that a view, a worldview that our founders embraced? Is it something that they would go for? Well, actually, it turns out no. Ben Franklin, in his autobiography, Toward the Mystery, he wrote, "I have found Christian dogma unintelligible. Early in life, I absented myself from Christian assemblies." George Washington, Thomas Jefferson wrote this in his personal diary, February 1, 1799. When the clergy addressed General Washington on his departure from the government, it was observed in their consultation that he had never on any occasion said a word to the public which showed a belief in the Christian religion. And they thought he should so pen their address as to force him at length to declare publicly whether he's a Christian or not. However, Jefferson writes in his diary, the old fox was too cunning for them. He answered every article of their address particularly except that which he passed over without notice. George Washington never said a word on the subject in any of his public papers except in the valedictory letter to the governors of the states. And he goes on from there.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
But the really amazing quote is the "I have sworn eternal opposition to any form of tyranny over the minds of men." We'll get to that in a second. Welcome back. Benny, watching Free Speech TV on the Dish Network. Hey, Benny, what's on your mind today?
Oh, not much. I just thinking about sustainability.
Mm-hmm.
There was a gal on C-SPAN, and she'd been involved with Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, but she was talking about what their goal was in getting home ownership up, and ignored sustainability. And yeah, so that was a part of the housing bubble.
Yeah.
But then the other thing is, but our democracy with unlimited money going into the elections and the lobbyists,
right,
it's unsustainable.
Yeah. Yeah. You've noticed. I agree.
And unless the Democratic Party thinks along those lines, they're going to be unsustainable.
Yeah. Well,
unless they realize after this last election, and I don't know if they have, but it's got to get back to the grassroots. They got to get in touch with the workers, the families, and get out of the Beltway bubble.
Yeah. I totally agree.
Make some real changes. I mean, my grandkids are having a hell of a time. Yeah. And it keeps getting worse every year. I mean, when I grew up and you grew up, things got better all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now they just keep getting worse and worse.
Yeah. I totally agree. Benny, we'll see where this goes, and we'll continue the conversation. Thanks for the call, and thanks for sharing your observations. Bob in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Hey, Bob, what's up?
Tom, I have a question. I guess it was Paul Ryan was just talking about this 20% corporate tax rate, as opposed to the 35, I guess it is now. And I was just wondering if they do close those loopholes, do you think that might be a little bit better, having the 20 and no loopholes, or do you think Paul Ryan's just kind of wishful thinking?
I guarantee it's not wishful thinking, it's a scam. I guarantee you that the corporate loopholes that are used by big transnational corporations, the ability to stash money offshore, for example, the ability to expense things, the ability to use tax-deductible stock options as a form of compensation, and then the executives who are thus compensated only pay a maximum of 20% interest or income tax on the money that they make. All of those things will remain intact. Those are the biggest loopholes, And those are the things that the Republicans are not going to touch. They're not going to touch the deductibility of executive salaries. They're not going to touch the deductibility of travel. They're not going to touch the deductibility of company cars. They're not going to touch the deductibility of company jets and company cruise ships. They're not going to touch the deductibility of fancy company atriums. They're not going to touch the deductibility of companies spending hundreds of millions or billions of dollars on lobbying. All of those loopholes are going to remain in place.
Those are the loopholes that they get away with now.
Yeah, right. Those are the loopholes where corporate America uses most aggressively to avoid paying any tax at all. They're jurisdictional, or they have to do with compensation, or they have to do with what form of deductions can a corporation take. None of those are going to be seriously questioned at all. The only loopholes that they're looking at are the ones that people like you and me use, home mortgage interest, for example. So anyhow, Bob, I got to run. We'll be back.
On April 15th,
this year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
there is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity,
Resistance,
And resolve.
we join them.
We join them
we join them.
in standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
in the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you
24 hours a day.
Every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us.
Raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
So Judge Moore, Roy Moore, running for the United States Senate from Alabama. He's got a Democrat challenging him who actually has a good chance at this. But Moore is activating the worst impulses of the Fox News hard right, of the American Taliban hard right. So what did the founders actually think about Christianity and religion and morality and all that kind of stuff in government? Well, George Washington worked out the treaty with Tripoli. It was signed into law by John Adams in 1797. And it reads, and I quote, "As the government of the United States is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion, and has in itself no character of enmity against the laws, religion, or tranquility of Muslims, and as the same states never have entered into any war or act of hostility against any Mohammedan nation, it is declared by the parties that no pretext arising from religious opinions shall ever produce an interruption of the harmony existing between the two countries." But the founders realized that this wasn't just an issue of being Christians or not. They wanted to prevent warlords from coming to power in the United States. Keep in mind, Jefferson back in the day talked about the three kinds of tyranny. Tyranny by the rich, that's feudalism or fascism or oligarchy. Tyranny by warlords, that's, strongman government. And tyranny by churches. It's the priests taking over. Those were the three tyrannies that he feared. And so he didn't want to, the way that they stopped the warlords from taking control of the United States is by making the commander-in-chief of the armed services a civilian, the president, and taking away from the president, the second Article II branch of government, taking away from the president the power to make war and giving it exclusively to Congress, the Article I branch, the first among equals, the group that gets that 100% of the members of the House of Representatives are up for re-election every 2 years, 100% of the Senate every 6 years, 30%, about a third of the Senate is up for re-election in any given election cycle. So by doing that, they eliminated the possibility of a president being responsible for perpetual war, and which is a good thing. I mean, James Madison said about perpetual wars that in war, the discretionary power of the executive, the president, is extended. His influence in dealing out offices, honors, and emoluments is multiplied, and all the means of seducing the minds are added to those of subduing the force of the people. The same malignant aspect in republicanism may be traced to the inequality of fortunes and the opportunities of fraud growing out of a state of war, and in the degeneracy of manners and morals engendered by both. No nation can preserve its freedom in the midst of continual warfare. But I think one of the most important quotes is, since we're talking about Madison, there's just one more Madison thing. James Madison's first official veto was striking down a law that gave money. The federal government had been running poorhouses through the George Washington presidency, through the John Adams presidency, through the Thomas Jefferson presidency, and now you've got James Madison as president. And the religious folks in Congress came forward and said, instead of the federal government administering the poorhouse, we should give this money to the churches and let the churches run the poorhouse. And they actually passed that through Congress, the House and the Senate. And James Madison vetoed it. And his veto message says, and I quote, "Because the bill gives the church an authority to provide for the support of the poor and the educated of poor children of the same, this would be a precedent for giving to religious societies a legal agency, a legal responsibility, a legal ability to carry into effect a public and civil duty." In other words, Madison didn't want churches anywhere near educating or caring for poor people. But, one of the most interesting is Jefferson saying, "I've sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny imposed upon the mind of man." It's actually from a letter to an old friend of his, Benjamin Rush. And he says, "Dear sir, I promised you a letter on Christianity, which I have not forgotten. I do not know that it would reconcile the genus irritable vetum," that's the angry priests, "who are all in arms against me. Their hostility is on too interesting a ground to be softened. The delusion on the cause of the Constitution, which while it secured the freedom of the press, also covered the freedom of religion, has given the clergy a very favorite hope of obtaining an establishment of a particular form of Christianity in the United States. The returning good sense of our country," he's talking about the possibility that he himself could be elected president in 1800, "the returning good sense of our country threatens abortion to their hopes, and the preachers believe that any portion of power confided to me, such as being elected president, will be exerted in opposition to their schemes. And they believe rightly, for I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of men. And this is all they have to fear for me, but enough, too, in their opinion." Thomas Jefferson laying it out. And when he was talking about the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, in his diary, again, he talks about how they tried to change the wording. He says, "Where the preamble to the Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom declares that coercion is a departure from the plan of the holy author of our religion, an amendment was proposed by inserting the words Jesus Christ. The insertion was rejected by a great majority in proof that they meant to comprehend the Jew, the Gentile, the Christian, the Mohammedan, and the Hindu."
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
"And the infidel of every denomination," Jefferson writes. We'll be back. Our Thom Hartmann University book review of the day is Richard Belzer's new book, Corporate Conspiracies, How Wall Street Took Over Washington. This is from the introduction. Of all the books we researched for this work, the title we loved the most was this one, Regime Change Begins at Home, Freeing America from Corporate Rule. We loved it because it presents as a hard fact something that very few people completely understand. And then he quotes from that book. Since 1980, America has been run by a corporate regime that has co-opted both political parties and shifted sovereignty from we the people to transnational corporations. End of quote. Since this book covers some corporate conspiracies, we will no doubt take a lot of heat for that and be deridingly referred to as conspiracy theorists.
So we would just like to remind people that the phrase conspiracy theorist was actually invented by the Central Intelligence Agency, to be used as a weaponized term with which to discourage people from seeking the truth. We kid you not. CIA document 1035-960, dated April 1, 1967, regarding the agency's concern about the reputation of the American government, in quotes. That document also suggested various tactics for countering, quote, conspiratorial arguments, which confronted the gaping holes critics observed in the findings of the Warren Commission, which investigated, in quotes, they really did no such thing in reality, the assassination of President Kennedy. Quote, the agency also directed its members to employ propaganda assets to negate and refute the attacks of the critics, end quote. So as you can see, and as the Freedom of Information Act release of that CIA document clearly reveals, the use of the term conspiracy theorist is actually a conspiracy itself. But if you believe rightly that Julius Caesar and hundreds of other leaders were the victims of conspirators, as they were, then you're an evil conspiracy theorist, right? Well, if anybody actually believes that, then you'd better read up on your history, boys and girls, because conspiracies are an ongoing and very common occurrence in human conduct. Now, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. Are you aware that many friends of Robin Williams believe that his suicide was the direct result of the prescription drugs he was taking? And that over 23,000 suicides are attributed to psychiatric drugs each year in the United States? Did you know that turning prisons into a big business has resulted in the United States having the highest incarceration rate in the history of the world, and that most are just drug crimes? Are you aware that the historic event of the toppling of the statue of Saddam Hussein in Iraq was actually a U.S. military PSYOPs, psychological operations warfare, program, a completely orchestrated event with the knowledge and assistance of U.S. media, and not a spontaneous event as it was portrayed by our media? Did you know that the Pentagon is sending $1.5 trillion of our tax dollars to their corporate buddies for a new fighter jet that's already superfluous? Are you aware that continuing to rely on oil instead of investing in low-carbon energy solutions will cost us $44 trillion due to climate change? Did you know that companies like General Motors at times know that their products will kill people, but they do nothing because it's actually cheaper to compensate the victims than it is to correct the problem? Then read and learn on, friends. American corporations have been getting away with murder, literally, for many, many years. Just take a good look at their history. The above example of GM is a proven point. Corporate consumer advocate Clarence Ditlow, executive director of the nonprofit Center for Automotive Safety, bitterly criticized the settlement. Quote, GM killed over 100 people by knowingly putting a defective ignition switch into over 1 million vehicles, Ditlow said. Today, thanks to its lobbyists, GM officials walk off scot-free while its customers are 6 feet under. Tobacco companies knowingly lied about the harmful effects of cigarettes for decades, even though there was plenty of known medical proof of their damage. They even knowingly hid that information from the public. Oil, gas, and chemical companies have been knowingly polluting our planet with cancer-causing chemicals and products also for decades, and they know that they're doing it. Pharmaceutical companies have lied and attempted to minimize news coverage regarding the deaths that they know the drugs will cause. That's murder, plain and simple. Maybe you can paint a public relations damage control over that landscape if you happen to have all their tons of money and paid political influence, but it's still murder. Look at the parents of one of their victims straight in the eye and try and tell them it's not murder. Do you honestly think they'll listen to you? This book is an effort to reveal the insanity of corporate greed once and for all. At this point, most people probably care more about their local football team than they do about the workings of our democratic republic. And while we understand their frustration and their reasons, that's not good enough, folks. We have to all get involved to stop these bastards from getting away with what they've been getting away with for far too long. They're robbing us blind, poisoning our planet, hijacking our democracy, and ruining the futures of our children and grandchildren. They must be stopped. As an agent of the U.S. government employed to implement policies to benefit U.S. corporations, John Perkins noted in his classic work, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, that corporate America has extended its rule beyond our borders. Quoting from Perkins, what we had previously considered U.S. corporations were now truly international, even from a legal standpoint. Many of them were incorporated in a multitude of countries. They could pick and choose from an assortment of rules and regulations under which to conduct their activities, and the multitude of globalizing trade agreements and organizations made this even easier. Corporatocracy had become a fact, and it increasingly exerted itself as the single major influence on world economics and politics. Sad to make this observation, but we have become a government of the corporations, by the corporations, and for the corporations.
Hartmann here with you. And no, that music is not being turned down in my ear. There we go. Okay, we've got a whole new studio here, and we're just figuring it out. So my apologies for the music stepping on my quoting Jefferson. So let me just read that one more time, because I think it's a major big deal. In fact, there's a whole bunch of pieces to this. Thomas Jefferson, June 5th, 1824, a letter to Major John Cartwright. Our revolution commenced on a more favorable ground than the foundation of English or biblical law. It presented us with an album on which we were free to write what we pleased. We had no occasion to search into musty records, to hunt up royal parchments, or to investigate the laws and institutions of a semi-barbarous ancestry. We appealed to those of nature and found them engraved in our hearts. End of quote from Thomas Jefferson. And you will recall, in the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson says, nature's God. And John Adams had taken that phrase, nature's God, and X'd it out and replaced it with the Christian God. And Jefferson X'd it out and put it back into nature's God. And I mean, this is from the preamble, right? When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth a separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitled them, requires they declare the causes which impel them to separation. And then he goes into it. So very straightforward, right? So Jefferson, number one, not a big believer in the Bible. He said, Sir Matthew Hale lays it down in these words, wrote Jefferson to Dr. Thomas Cooper. He says, Christianity is part and parcel of the laws of England, according to Hale. He says, but Christianity was not introduced into England until the 7th century, the conversion of the first Christian king of the Heptarchy having taken place around the year 598, and that of the last around 686. Hence, here then was a space of 200 years during which the common law was in existence and Christianity was no part of it. We might as well say that the Newtonian system of philosophy is part of the common law, as that the Christian religion is. In truth, the alliance between church and state in England has ever made their judges accomplices in the frauds of the clergy, and even bolder than they are. He writes a letter to John Adams in January of 1824, January 24, 1814, excuse me. And it says, it is not only the sacred volumes the churches have thus interpolated, gutted, and falsified, but the works of others relating to them, and even the laws of the land. Our judges, too, have lent a ready hand to further these frauds, and have been willing to lay the yoke of their own opinions on the necks of others, to extend the coercions of municipal law to the dogmas of their religion, by declaring that these make a part of the law of the land. Adams replied, he said, you and I hope for splendid improvements in human society. Hope springs eternal. 8 million Jews hope for a Messiah more powerful and glorious than Moses, David, or Solomon, who is to make them as powerful as he pleases. Some hundreds of millions of Muslims expect another prophet more powerful than Muhammad, who is to spread Islam over the whole world. Hundreds of millions of Christians expect and hope for a millennium in which Jesus is to reign for 1,000 years over the whole world before it is burned up. The Hindus expect another and final incarnation of Vishnu, who is to do great and wonderful things, I know not what. You and I hope for splendid improvements in human society and vast amelioration in the condition of mankind. Our faith may be supposed by more rational arguments than any of the former. So you got John Adams trashing religion and religious people. You got George Washington refusing to acknowledge whether or not he's a Christian and saying in private to his friends that he's not. You've got Thomas Jefferson explicitly denying Christianity and taking the New Testament and cutting all the miracles out of it, and that Jefferson Bible is still in print today. And then here is the quote, in the Jefferson Memorial, there is this quote etched into the circular, right around the top, to the top of the memorial. And that is, I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man. But, unfortunately, that's a sentence fragment. That's not the entire sentence. The entire sentence is the returning good sense of our country threatens abortion to their hopes. Now, who is they and what are their hopes? And they believe that any portion of power confided to me will be exerted in opposition to their schemes. And they believe rightly. For I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man. But this is all they have to fear from me, and enough, too, in their opinion. And then he also, this is from his diary, he's talking about when he wrote the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom and how they tried to insert Jesus into it. He says, where the preamble to the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom declares that coercion is a departure from the plan of the holy author of our religion. In other words, by coercion, he's talking about a state, religion kind of thing. An amendment was proposed by inserting the words Jesus Christ, so it should read, a departure from the plans of Jesus Christ, the holy author of our religion. The insertion was rejected by a great majority in proof, now the great majority, he's talking about all the members of the Virginia House of Burgesses, in proof that they meant to comprehend within the mantle of its protection, it being the Virginia Statute of Religious Liberty, that it meant to comprehend within the mantle of its protection the Jew and the Gentile, the Christian, the Mohammedan, Muslim we would call today, the Hindu, and the infidel of every denomination. Judge Moore and Fox News are just plain old flat out wrong. There's no other way to say it. So anyway, Tony in Long Beach, California. Hey, Tony, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. My mom used to have an old saying that said, God don't like ugly and he ain't crazy about pretty either.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I'm using that in reference to the whole Donna Brazil thing. I got up this morning and was reading about it, and I'm like, you know what? All these people that are so down on the Bernie people are so breaking up the party. Everybody's got to admit their own fault and their own problem with what's going on. Because the Democratic Party is going to implode really soon if people don't just take responsibility for what they've done and move forward.
I think there's a fundamental difference, Tony, between the Republican Party's implosion and the Democratic Party's implosion. What's happening on the Republican Party is that it has been taken over, by and large, by a group of billionaires, right? The Koch network. In the Republican Party, in the Democratic Party, excuse me, you've got, good government folks. You've got people who actually want a functioning democratic republic here. And there are a few folks who are like, yeah, we're all in favor of a functioning democratic republic, but look out for the pharmaceutical industry, please, because they fund my campaigns. Or look out for the banks, please, because they fund my campaigns. And until we get money out of politics, this is a systemic problem. It's not a Democratic Party problem, a Republican Party problem. This is a systemic problem that was created by the Supreme Court, saying that it's legal for rich people to own politicians.
Mm-hmm. That's it. And until they come back, it'll be another Republican, because let's just face it, they stick together and they get one message and they stick to it. And whereas Democrats are all over the place, and people are so busy, pointing the finger. I look at it like this: Hillary lost, plain and simple. She lost. It's over. Let's start over. Let's do what we got to do, because if you don't, there won't be a Democratic Party.
Yeah.
I'm telling you that right now. That's how I feel.
Yeah.
And I am just sick and tired of people not looking at facts. I try to look at facts. When they try to blame everything on the millennials still voted for Hillary in the majority. It's just a lot more of them may have gone Green Party or, for Bernie or whatever, but the majority still voted for Hillary.
Yeah.
Same thing for people of color. What I'm saying is like white folks are having a black experience right now. They're finding out all the lies they've been told and the things they believed in that weren't true. But when you look at the facts, white males, females over the age of 40 that made more than $40,000 voted for Trump hands down.
Right.
That's blame yourself. You can't keep pointing fingers at Bernie people, Green Party. You have to look at what white people voted for him and why. And until you address that, until we get back to the unions and the grassroots people or whatever, the Democrats are going to keep losing.
Well, and the question, Tony, is what percentage of those white people who voted against basically not only their own interests, but the interests of the nation, what percentage of those white people who voted for Trump, that 53% of white women, and I forget the percentage of white men, but it was substantial. It was over 50%. What percentage of them voted for Trump because they actually thought that his message of you know, we need to change our trade deals, we need to start taxing billionaires, we need to break up the big banks because they're killers. I mean, you know, he said a lot of things that were consistent with arguably the things that Bernie was saying. You know, they were all lies, but he said them. So how many of those people voted for him for those reasons versus how many of those people voted for him because of all his racist rhetoric? And I'm guessing, as a white guy, I'm guessing it's 50-50. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Tony?
I would say that probably pretty much, but the thing is that I have a problem with so-called progressive white people is you still knew what type of guy he was, and it's nothing new there. And I'm getting a little tired of people claiming, you know, I believe, but, you know, Barack Obama didn't. It's like they're so fixed on getting rid of the image of him being a black man that they still, a lot of white people are racist that don't want to admit it, and everybody knows how Trump was in the reality star.
Right, or they may not even realize it. Tony, thanks for the call. Great to hear from you. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls right after this. And welcome back. Jill, watching Free Speech TV in Princeton, Minnesota on the Dish Network. Hey, Jill, what's up?
Hi, Tom. You know, your last hour was just bringing me to tears. And then Tony started to speak up about, you know, racism. And then I was going to try to tell a funny in a way that I hope Tony can understand. I was coming home from my Lakes area Move to Amend meeting, and I was pulled over by a deputy sheriff, and I had a headlight out, and he had a trainee who was standing directly behind my Jeep, which my Jeep has a bumper sticker which says Move to Amend, and it also says honk for a political revolution. While he's staring at my bumper sticker, and the deputy sheriff was back checking out my driver's license and everything else, I for a moment thought, after all of the shootings and everything, do I dare to bend down to grab a few pamphlets? And, you know, because somebody's right behind me, oh no.
Well,
I'm a white female.
Exactly. I was going to say, here's where white privilege comes in.
Do that.
Yes.
And so I did that. And but for a moment I thought, I did think, and I remembered, nope, I'm a white female. I live in Minnesota, and I'm on a nice highway. And to Tony, yeah, I understand racism, but I thought about what that instant was. Anyway, to bring the story back to fruition, the deputy sheriff gave me a nice, yeah, your headlights out, no ticket, of course, nice. And I gave him a pamphlet about Move to Amend and told him I came from my meeting from Brainerd. I drive an hour and a half to my meeting, and I said, what we are doing is trying to say that corporations aren't persons, which has been in our United States Constitution little by little since the 1800s. And citizens are not corporations. The second part is, of course, speech is not money.
Right.
The biggest part is corporations shouldn't have the word persons attached to them.
So how did he respond?
He took the pamphlets, and then I saw both of them kind of, while I was okay to go and move along, looking at the pamphlets. I thought that was kind of cool.
Okay.
Nice story, and nice to help Tony know that, you know, in my white world, I did recognize, and he feels good.
Yeah, what it would have been like. I think more and more white people are starting to get some sense of the black experience in this country, and you know, some of them just discard that, but a lot of them I think are experiencing genuine empathy. Jill, thank you for the call.
I'm very new to politics.
Yeah. Jill, I got to run. I'm sorry. We're going to hit this break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Ray in Austin, Texas. Hey, Ray, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, great show. So I'm calling because, okay, so if you looked at America, the collective, the majority as a person, right, I'm not talking about individuals, but America as a country, we would be overweight, we'd be high on all sorts of drugs, we're obsessed with celebrities, sports, money, television, right? There's all these things that we're just totally distracting from, the police brutality, the fact that we're deporting 10-year-olds with cerebral palsy, our roads look like crap, but we don't seem to want to do anything about it. We're just stuffing it like deeper and deeper. But sooner or later, you know, these things are going to come out, and you know history, you know it well. And so I'm just curious from your take, like, how much longer, because the way I see it is we cannot continue to go down this path without some sort of reckoning or correction of some kind taking place, the same way as a person, as an individual who's doing all these things that our country's doing, is sooner or later going to have to deal with that pain. You know, it's the line that James Baldwin says, right? It's either going to be willing or it's going to be unwillingly that we're going to have to confront these things. At least the way I see it is we can't keep going down this path. So from what you know about history and the way you see our country going, what is that reckoning going to look like? How are we going to deal with that pain? Will it ever happen? I'd love to know what you think based on just the way you see it. So thank you.
Well, as kind of you're welcome, Ray. As kind of and thanks for the call. As kind of a variation on Winston Churchill's comment that democracy is a terrible form of government, but it's better than any others that have been developed. And I'm paraphrasing; it's not word for word, but close to that. I think that's that's the same issue. Is that yeah, we've got these crises. You know, you identified a bunch of the negatives, as it were. But we also have some extraordinary positives, and we need to be focusing on those, and we need to be moving toward those. Frankly, I just, I think that's where we need to move. Mike in Cleveland, Georgia. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, good morning. A couple of things. I got a phone call from Intercessors Prayer for America. Mm-hmm. They've got some kind of a phone thing going on, a computer thing going on this weekend, and they're talking about the whole of America being attacked. I think it's a pretty dangerous propaganda type affair going on, and one of the things in their newsletters was they're calling these Antifa folks Antichrist. I get this garbage because I live here in Georgia.
Yeah. Mike, I guarantee you the main message of all of that is going to be send us money.
Yeah, it may be the main message, but they're talking about an imminent attack on the entire United States, like somewhere around the 6th or something. You guys need to pay attention to this garbage.
Whoa.
But a second issue that has been on my mind since I heard you the other day talking about nuclear stuff, I do all that big commercial garbage. when you take and put all that heat, whether it's through cooling towers or right directly cooled by the ocean, down at Hutchinson Island, different places like that, all this heat is going right directly into our atmosphere and into our ocean, and you can't add that much heat, millions and millions and millions of gallons of boiling damn water. You can't add that to the program without taking it into account, and I ain't never heard anybody mention it.
Yeah. That's an interesting question, Mike. And one that probably the folks at Beyond Nuclear would know the answer to. Is the contribution to global warming of nuclear power, and for that matter of conventional power plants, I mean, coal-fired power plants also have to have water to cool them. Is the contribution to global warming of power generation, is it consequential? Does it represent 1/100th of 1% of global warming, or does it represent 8% of global warming? Right? What is it, and how consequential is it? I don't know the answer to the question, but it's a fascinating question. Mike, thanks a lot for the call. Casey in West Palm Beach, Florida. Hey, Casey, what's up?
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
Good. What's on your mind?
Good. I'm glad this came out with the whole Donna Brazier. I know, she's taking one from the team or whatever, but she was just as much as fault as, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Roberta Lang, Hillary herself. I mean, she was a big culprit too.
Well, I would encourage you to read her piece in Politico, because what she's asserting is that she had no idea. And she had no idea until she went back and she looked up the documents, and she's got the document, and she's got the piece of it and all this kind of stuff. And again, it's something that the political party, the DNC, did in order to increase the probability that they would win the election in 2016, which is a entirely reasonable thing. But on the other hand, it's not the way it should have been handled. So, hopefully there'll be a rebooting of the Democratic Party. We'll fix the superdelegate problem and deal with some of these issues. But
yeah. We got to get rid of these cancerous people, Tom. I mean, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Perez. I mean, these people are the establishment. They are what's wrong with the Democratic Party, and they're running down the same road as what lost them in the election. You know what I'm saying? I don't see the Democratic Party fixing the problems. They just want to say, just be big boys and put the big pants on and just vote for us anyways.
Well, here's the reality, Casey, is that we should be referring to this they as a we, right? In other words, the Democratic Party, if enough of us were inside the Democratic Party, we're supporting the Democratic Party, we're participating in the Democratic Party, then we wouldn't be sitting around saying, oh, gee, there's that terrible Donna Brazile. But I was one of Donna's biggest critics when it came out that she might have been involved in the rigging of the primary, essentially. And what she's asserting in this piece is that she had nothing to do with it, and that it was entirely Debbie Wasserman Schultz's fault. And I think this is Donna Brazile pleading for
why is Debbie
forgiveness, essentially.
Still part of the Democratic Party? I don't get it.
Because she's an elected representative in the state of Florida. She's no longer running the party. She resigned from the leadership and the management of the DNC. She's gone. She's just a congresswoman from Florida now. But she really screwed up. She screwed up big time in 2016. And she screwed up in part by signing this agreement with Robbie Mook, who was running the Hillary campaign, that the Hillary campaign would essentially take over the DNC back in 2015 in exchange for paying off about $10 million worth of debts that the party had. And, you could argue it was malicious. I don't think it was. I think it was an effort by the party to win an election. But it certainly shouldn't have happened and should not happen again. Casey, thanks for the call. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Naomi Klein's brilliant new book, This Changes Everything. This from the introduction. A voice came over the intercom. Would the passengers of Flight 3935, scheduled to depart Washington, D.C. for Charleston, South Carolina, kindly collect their carry-on luggage and get off the plane? They went down the stairs and gathered on the hot tarmac. Then they saw something unusual. The wheels of the U.S. Airways jet had sunk into the black pavement as if it was wet cement. The wheels were lodged so deep, in fact, that the truck that came to tow the plane away couldn't pry out loose. The airline had hoped that without the added weight of the plane's 35 passengers, the aircraft would be light enough to pull. It wasn't. Someone posted a picture. Why is my flight canceled? Because D.C. is so damn hot that our planes sank 4 inches into the pavement. Eventually, a larger, more powerful vehicle was brought in to tow the plane, and this time it worked. The plane finally took off 3 hours behind schedule. The spokesperson for the airline blamed the incident on very unusual temperatures. The temperatures in the summer of 2012 were indeed unusually hot, as they were the year before and the year before, and it's no mystery why this has been happening. The profligate burning of fossil fuels, the very thing that U.S. Airways was bound and determined to do, despite the inconvenience presented by a melting tarmac. This irony, the fact that the burning of fossil fuels is so radically changing our climate that it's getting in the way of our capacity to burn fossil fuels, did not stop the passengers of Flight 3935 from re-embarking and continuing their journeys. Nor was climate change mentioned in any of the major news coverage of the incident. I'm in no position to judge these passengers. All of us who live high consumer lifestyles, wherever we may happen to reside, are metaphorically passengers on Flight 3935. Faced with a crisis that threatens our survival as a species, our entire culture is continuing to do the very thing that caused the crisis, only with an extra dose of elbow grease behind it. Like the airline bringing in a truck with a more powerful engine to tow that plane, the global economy is upping the ante from conventional sources of fossil fuels to even dirtier and more dangerous versions. Bitumen from the Alberta tar sands, oil from deepwater drilling, gas from hydraulic fracking, coal from detonated mountains, and so on. Meanwhile, each supercharged natural disaster produces new irony-laden snapshots of a climate increasingly inhospitable to the very industries most responsible for its warming, like the 2013 historic floods in Calgary that forced the head offices of the oil companies mining the Alberta tar sands to go dark and send their employees home, while a train carrying flammable petroleum products teetered on the edge of a disintegrating rail bridge. Or the drought that hit the Mississippi River 1 year earlier, pushing water levels so low that barges loaded with coal and oil were unable to move for days while they waited for the Army Corps of Engineers to dredge a channel. They had to appropriate funds allocated to rebuild from the previous year's historic flooding along the same waterway. Or the coal-fired power plants in other parts of the country that were temporarily shut down because the waterways that they draw into cooler machinery were either too hot or too dry, or in some cases both. Living with this kind of cognitive dissonance is simply part of being alive in this jarring moment of history, when a crisis that we have been studiously ignoring is hitting us in the face. And yet we're doubling down on the stuff that caused the crisis in the first place. I denied climate change for longer than I care to admit. I knew it was happening, sure, and not like Donald Trump and the Tea Party years going on about how the continued existence of winter proves it's all a hoax. But I stayed pretty hazy on the details and only skimmed most of the news stories, especially the really scary ones. I told myself the science was too complicated and that the environmentalists, they're dealing with it. And I continue to behave as if there was nothing wrong with the shiny card in my wallet attesting to my elite frequent flyer status.
A great many of us engage in this kind of climate change denial. We look for a split second and then we look away. Or we look but then turn it into a joke. More signs of the apocalypse, which is another way of looking away. Or we look but tell ourselves comforting stories about how humans are clever and will come up with a technological miracle that will safely suck the carbon out of the skies or magically turn down the heat of the sun, which I was to discover while researching this book is yet another way of looking away. Or we try to look, we look but try to be hyper-rational about it. Dollar for dollar, it's more efficient to focus on economic development than climate change, since wealth is the best protection from climate extremes, weather extremes. As if having a few more dollars will make much difference when your city is underwater, which is a way of looking away if you happen to be a policy wonk. Or we look but tell ourselves we're too busy to care about something so distant and abstract, even though we saw the water in the subways in New York City and the people on the rooftops in New Orleans and know that no one is safe, the most vulnerable least of all. And though perfectly understandable, this too is a way of looking away. Or we look but tell ourselves that all we can do is focus on ourselves, meditate and shop at farmers markets and stop driving, but forget trying to actually change the systems that are making the crisis inevitable, because that's too much bad energy and it'll never work. And at first it may appear as if we are looking, because many of these lifestyle changes are indeed part of the solution, but we still have one eye tightly shut. Or maybe we look, really look, but then inevitably we seem to forget. Remember and then forget again. Climate change is like that. It's hard to keep in your head for very long. We engage in this odd form of on-again, off-again ecological amnesia for perfectly rational reasons. We deny it because we fear that letting in the full reality of this crisis will change everything. And we are right. And the book is This Changes Everything by Naomi Klein. Here's we cannot.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. The Fox News network is, in my humble opinion, promoting authoritarianism, and this, and it's not just Fox News. I mean, it's this whole right-wing ecosystem, media ecosystem. And authoritarianism is the go-to place for Donald Trump and his compatriots. And it's been the go-to place for the hard right basically forever, authoritarianism. You've seen it rise in countries around the world and among governments around the world. This is one of the things, you know, when people are stressed, when people are freaked out, when people feel like they got nothing, or the future isn't, you know, going to be as good as they had hoped for, or even the present is not what they expected that it should be. When that happens, people tend to turn to parental figures. You know, Mommy, Daddy, take care of me. And so Daddy Trump comes along, Big Daddy Trump, and says, I'm Big Daddy, I'll take care of you. I alone can save the nation. Remember that? And out of that authoritarianism comes the destruction of our government. Out of that authoritarianism comes crony capitalism, comes a whole crony ecosystem of you know, Scott Pruitt saying, well, actual scientists can't work for the EPA any longer. You have to be a shill scientist. You have to be a scientist who works for industry. But research scientists, no, we don't want to hear from them anymore. We don't want those thinking research. And it's not just that. I mean, you know, this Dana Milbank in today's Washington Post. The title is The Other Huge Scandal Mueller Brought to Light This Week. And he starts out talking about Sam Clovis. Now, I've talked about Sam Clovis on this program a number of times. I'm pretty sure I've met Sam Clovis a couple of times at these right-wing talk show events and you know, Radio Rows and whatnot. Although I frankly I have no clear recollection of him. It's just when I see him on TV, I you know, it's like I've met that guy. I just don't specifically know when and where. But Sam Clovis was a right-wing talk show host. He has no scientific background. And Donald Trump has appointed him to be the head scientist at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the agency that oversees the safety of your food and mine. The head scientist. A guy who doesn't believe in climate change. A guy who doesn't believe in science. And who is not a scientist. He's a talk show host, a right-wing talk show host, is going to be the head scientist for the United States. Now probably he's actually not going to be the head scientist for the USDA, because it appears for the last few weeks he's been cooperating with Robert Mueller's investigation into Donald Trump. But still, they tried that. In fact, Clovis, here's some of the things Trump promised to hire the best people, writes Dana Milbank. And as scientists go, Clovis is an excellent talk show host. Among his scientific breakthroughs, being extremely skeptical of climate change, calling homosexuality a choice, suggesting gay rights would lead to legalized pedophilia, pushing the Obama birther allegation, and calling Eric Holder and Tom Perez specifically a racist bigot and a racist Latino. Trump may want extreme vetting of immigrants, but he's rather more lenient with his appointees, writes Dana Milbank. On Wednesday, he named Robin Bernstein to be ambassador to the Dominican Republic. Bernstein only speaks basic Spanish, because it's so hard to find Americans who speak Spanish. But she does have this. She's a member at Mar-a-Lago. Seriously. A group called American Oversight had the foresight to make a records request for resumes of those hired by the Trump administration. Among the best of Trump's hires, they found Sid Bowditch, Assistant to the Secretary of Energy for Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. He used to work for the Meineke Car Branch in Seabrook, New Hampshire. Before that, he was the branch manager for some tire shops. So a guy who has changed mufflers and replaced tires is now in charge, the Secretary of Energy for Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. Brilliant, right? It's brilliant. Victoria Barton, Congressional Relations for Regions 2, 5, and 6, Department of Housing and Urban Development. In other words, she's in charge of a good chunk of HUD. Prior to working for the Trump campaign, Barton was an office manager, and between 2013 and 2015, a bartender and bar manager. Milbank writes, with no small amount of sarcasm, the expertise in housing policy possessed by Barton is no doubt invaluable to HUD Secretary Ben Carson, a retired brain surgeon. In other words, he's got no background in housing either. Christopher Hagan, a confidential assistant at the Agriculture Department. Before working on the Trump campaign, he was, between 2009 and 2015, a cabana attendant at Westchester Country Club in Rye, New York. According to his resume, he, quote, identified and addressed customers' needs in a timely and orderly manner. Great. He's now over there at the Agriculture Department. Nick Brusky, also a confidential assistant at the USDA, the Trump campaign worker, previously drove a truck. He was a trustee in Butler Township, Ohio at the same time, and as Political noted, his resume lists coursework but no degrees. And David Matthews, yet another confidential assistant at the Agriculture Department. He developed scented candles while serving as a legal receptionist before joining the Trump campaign. So we've got a Meineke muffler guy, we've got a tire replacement guy, we've got a woman who is a bartender, we've got a guy who is a cabana attendant, you got a truck driver. No slam on truck drivers. I've met truck drivers who I would much rather were running our country than some of the people who are and do, but in any case. As a confidential assistant at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, it seems your credential being that you used to drive a truck is not. Anyway, David Matthews, yet another confidential assistant, developing scented candles. So we've got quite a brain trust here. Dana is imagining a conversation, hey, would you like a job at the Transportation Department? I don't know, sir. I was an Uber driver before I joined your campaign. How about the Army Corps of Engineer? Well, I ran a coin-operated laundromat. Anybody here know anything about infrastructure? Silence. I was a toll taker on the New Jersey Turnpike before the campaign. Now I'm in charge of climate science at the EPA. Anybody else? Well, I was a plumber, but they made me chief medical officer at NIH because I watched a lot of Grey's Anatomy. What, they had no doctors for NIH? Well, we had one chiropractor on the campaign, sir, but they needed him to run NASA. A chiropractor running NASA? What's next? A musician, a strategic command? Actually, sir, the Stratcom commander was a hairdresser. Now, that part is all facetious, right? That part is fake news, as it were. But Fox News tweeting, now this is Jake Tapper. I started out by saying Fox News has been promoting authoritarianism. Jake Tapper unloaded on them, calling them sick and disgusting. And so Fox News then unloaded on Jake Tapper. They tweeted, CNN's Jake Tapper says Allah Akbar is beautiful right after New York City terror attack. Although Fox News left out some details, Jake Tapper fires back saying, Fox News is lying. I said it can be said at beautiful moments, wedding, birth, and too often at times like this horrific terrorist attack. Allah Akbar is a prayer. If you don't understand how radical Islamic terrorists justify their evil using religion, West cannot defeat it. And yes, I know they do this all the time. Still, literally a day after this horrific attack, they would launch this smear. It's sick. In this case, the they that Jake Tapper is talking about is Fox News. He said there was a time when one could tell the difference between Fox and the nut jobs at InfoWars. It's getting tougher and tougher. Lies are lies, says Jake Tapper. Amazing stuff. Amazing stuff. We'll be back with your calls after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So you think Judge Moore has a good chance at picking up a seat in the Senate? Are Americans ready for a total theocrat? Welcome back. Stephanie in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Hey, Stephanie, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching Free Speech TV.
Well, basically, I'm taking issue with the assertion that you made that Bernie Sanders would have won. I realize we litigate this thing almost every day.
I don't. And I'm not going to.
Your callers do.
Yeah.
Basically, any kind of study that might have shown anything of that nature does not take into consideration the criminal element of the Republican Party. They stole the election. The Russians would have had a field day with a socialist running. They know all about socialism.
Yeah, it may be.
People refuse to acknowledge that we are under a socialist system in many cases, like Medicare, Social Security, things of that nature.
Right.
They want the government out of their Medicare. They want the government out of their Social Security. The American people are dumb.
Well, I don't think it's that the American people are dumb, Stephanie. I think it's that they're uninformed. And they're uninformed because our business model for news in the mid-1980s changed. And it changed from news is what is necessary in order for a radio or television station to keep their license, so they have to actually provide real and good news, to news is something that can make profit for the corporation that owns the network. And so instead of being concerned about what people need to know and what is real news, we're going to be concerned with what gets people to click, what gets people to watch. In other words, if it bleeds, it leads. That's where it's going to go. So yeah, and as I was quoting that study from last week, and I had it printed out last week, and I never did it on the air because I thought as soon as I say this, somebody's going to call up and say what you said, Stephanie. And it was just not to pick on you, but it's, yeah, we'll never know. We'll never know. But the bottom line is that it shouldn't have been played out the way it played out. Stephanie, thank you for the call. Noel in Riverside, California. Hey, Noel, what's on your mind today?
Okay. I wanted to talk about the Christian conversation for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to mention that to be a real Christian in this nation doesn't mean we shun any other belief or unbelief. We are just actually commissioned to be like witnesses of the love for one another. And I think that's what maybe some of the forefathers meant. And what's wrong is when these CNOs, Christians in name only, have the platform and they get up there and portray Christians as, believing in something but not doing it, being phonies.
Yeah.
And Christian TV is, worldwide. It's on the rise because they believe in the goodness, and they act like all liberals are, unbelievers and believe in like anything goes. But I just wanted to mention, I didn't know if you know that, actually God was in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, and Washington on his first proclamation said it's the duty of all nations to acknowledge in the providence of Almighty God, to obey His will, to be grateful for His benefits. That's all I wanted to say, and I'm not putting down anybody, but when 911 happened, everybody didn't say, oh, help us trees or help us stars. They said, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And I think that's, like the Declaration says, that's our inalienable, being essence is to believe in God. Eventually, everybody will or they won't.
Okay.
So, thank you, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you, Noel. We'll be back.
Hi, I'm Valerie with Free Speech TV. We're proud to provide you with independent, unfiltered news and documentaries. And as our valued viewer, you can help us continue bringing Free Speech TV well into the future. Join our Pearly Gate Rebels, our planned giving program. Your gift of any size will help ensure democracy endures through an informed citizenry. You can donate property, money, or assets. It's easy. My spouse and I are proud Pearly Gate Rebels. We're doing our part to ensure that Free Speech TV will be here to deliver thought-provoking news and information well into the future. Join us. Call 877-378-8669 or email me at valerie@freespeech.org. Rebel against media owned by billionaires and become one of our Pearly Gate Rebels today.
Thom Hartmann here with you, and this is Robert Weissman, the president of Public Citizen, just sent this out. Trump's savage attack on veterans, service members, and consumers is a gift to the big banks. You'll recall, a couple of weeks ago we were talking about how the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, the CFPB, which was created by legislation that gives the government the authority to oversee banks ripping us off. One of the principal ways that we can fight being ripped off is through class action lawsuits. If a bank opens 1 million accounts, like Wells Fargo did, open over 1 million accounts without telling people, but you charge them for it, you charge them $10 a month, those people at $10 a month, $120 a year, nobody's going to sue over that. I mean, it costs thousands of dollars just to file a lawsuit. Who's going to sue over $120 a year? Nobody. But if 1 million people can get together and sue, now you got $120 million. You're talking serious money. And the banks, don't like that to happen. And so they basically lobbied to do away with the CFPB's protections. And the way they did this was doing away with what's referred to as the fiduciary rule. Well, actually, there were a couple of things. The fiduciary rule was one, which says that investment advisors must actually give you good investment advice rather than just rip you off. Trump did away with that. And then the second piece to this is the inability, blocking your ability to sue in a class action lawsuit, doing away with that. And the way that they do away with that is they put a forced arbitration clause in the contract. So when you sign the contract or when you click, yes, I agree to the terms of service, you're actually agreeing to give up your Seventh Amendment right to sue. The Seventh Amendment says in any matter over $10, you have a right to a trial by jury. That's criminal and civil. And your right to sue is done away with by these arbitration agreements. And Congress last week passed a law blowing up your right to sue. basically ending your right to sue in class action. Which means that the banks are just, you know, they got to be partying hard. It's amazing stuff. Just amazing stuff. Kenneth in Hesperia, Michigan. Hey, Kenneth, what's on your mind? Kenneth?
I'm just dumbfounded by the American public's ignorance in electing Donald Trump to the presidency of the United States. And the problems that we have in the United States with the poor and with the segregation and with the denigration of different races and religions is not particularly peculiar to the United States. It is universal. And the carbon billionaires, the drug dealer billionaires, the stock market billionaires have collectively destroyed virtually, along with the CIA's advice and help, every democratic government within the world. They're particularly destructive in South America.
Yeah, Kenneth, I think you're painting a darker picture than is real. I mean, there are vibrant democracies all over the world. I don't disagree that we have not been the best steward of democracies around the world over time. I mean, we blew up the democracy in Iran in 1954, in Iraq in, what was it, 58, something like that. You know, we helped overthrow, you know, what's his name, and put in, well, you know, whether it's Chile, you know, or Argentina, or, you know, whatever it may be. I mean, we have participated in these mistakes around the world, or these horrible events. But I really believe that my country, that the United States of America, is committed to small d democratic principles in a small r republic. And
not when they were involved in Vietnam.
No, Vietnam was a blot in the history of the United States, as is Iraq, as is Afghanistan. I mean, all of these wars that were fought by Republican politicians, well, in the case of Vietnam, it was a Democratic politician, Lyndon Johnson, for political gain, when they're fighting wars in order to be able to have some political upside to it.
It was atrocious.
It's a sin against democracy. And that's going on right now, just like our voting machines are a sin against. I can give you a long list of what's wrong, but I think that we also need to focus on what the potentials are, what the possibilities are, Kenneth. You know, we are a nation which is on the verge of going to, you know, a rational idea that everybody in the country should have health insurance. You know, it's just, or health care, just simple, straightforward stuff. I think that we have been moving forward for 240 years, and we're continuing to. Kenneth, thank you for the call. I get it that Trump is a step back, but I believe this is only temporary.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of your calls right after this.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Donut Economics, brand new book by Kate Raworth, 7 Ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economist. And on page 21 in the Who Wants to Be an Economist chapter, 7 Ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economist, here they are. Whether you consider yourself an economic veteran or novice, now is the time to uncover the economic graffiti that lingers in all of our minds. And if you don't like what you find, scrub it out, or better still, paint it over with new images that far better serve our needs and times. The rest of this book proposes 7 ways to think like a 21st century economist, revealing for each of those 7 ways the spurious image that has occupied our minds, how it has come to be so powerful, and the damaging influence it has had. But the time for mere critique is past, which is why the focus here is on creating new images that capture the essential principles to guide us now. The diagrams in this book aim to summarize that leap from old to new economic thinking. Taken together, they set out, quite literally, a new big picture for the 21st century economist. So here's a whirlwind tour of the ideas and images at the heart of donut economics. First, change the goal. For over 70 years, economics has been fixated on GDP, or national output, as its primary measure of progress. That fixation has been used to justify extreme inequalities of income and wealth, coupled with unprecedented destruction of the living world. For the 21st century, a far bigger goal is needed: meeting the human needs of every person within the means of our life-giving planet. And that goal is encapsulated in the concept of the donut. The challenge now is to create economies, local to global, that help to bring all of humanity into the donut's safe and just space. Instead of pursuing ever-increasing GDP, it's time to discover how to thrive in balance. Second, see the big picture. Mainstream economics depicts the whole economy with just one extremely limited image, the circular flow diagram. Its limitations have furthermore been used to reinforce a neoliberal narrative about the efficiency of the market, the incompetence of the state, the domesticity of the household, and the tragedy of the commons. It is time to draw the economy anew, embedding it within society and within nature and powered by the sun. This new depiction invites new narratives about the power of the market, the partnership of the state, the core role of the household, and the creativity of the commons. Third, nurture human nature. At the heart of 20th century economics stands the portrait of rational economic man. He has told us that we are self-interested, isolated, calculating, fixed in taste, and dominant over nature. And his portrait has shaped who we have become. But human nature is far richer than this. As early sketches of our new self-portrait reveal, we are social, interdependent, approximating, fluid in values, and dependent upon the living world. What's more, it is indeed possible to nurture human nature in ways that give us a far greater chance of getting into the donut's safe and just space. Fourth, get savvy with systems. The ironic crisscross of the market supply and demand curves is the first diagram that every economic student encounters. But it is rooted in misplaced 19th century metaphors of mechanical equilibrium. A far smarter starting point for understanding the economy's dynamism is systems thinking, summed up by a simple pair of feedback loops. Putting such dynamics at the heart of economics opens up many new insights, from the boom and bust of financial markets to the self-reinforcing nature of economic inequality and the tipping points of climate change. It's time to stop searching for the economy's elusive control levers and start rewarding it as an ever-evolving, complex system. Fifth, design to distribute. In the 20th century, one simple curve, the Kuznets curve, whispered a powerful message on inequality. It has to get worse before it can get better, and growth will eventually make it up, or even it up. But inequality, it turns out, is not an economic necessity. It is a design failure. 21st century economists will recognize that there are many ways to design economies to be far more distributive of the value that they generate, an idea best represented as a network of flows. It means that going beyond redistributing income to exploring ways to redistributing wealth, particularly the wealth that lies in controlling land, enterprise, technology, knowledge, and the power to create money. Sixth, create to regenerate. Economic theory has long portrayed a clean environment as a luxury good, affordable only for the well-off. This view was reinforced by the environmental Kuznets curve, which once again whispered that pollution has to get worse before it can get better, and growth will eventually clean it up. But there is no such law. Ecological degradation is simply the result of degenerative industrial design. This century needs economic thinking that unleashes regenerative design in order to create a circular, not linear, economy, and to restore humans as full participants to Earth's cyclical processes of life. Seventh, be agnostic about growth. One diagram in economic theory is so dangerous that it's actually never drawn, the long-term path of GDP growth. Mainstream economics views endless economic growth as a must, but nothing in nature grows forever, and the attempt to buck that trend is raising tough questions in high-income but low-growth countries. The book, Donut Economics. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And, you know, back in the day, like in the founding of the Republic, it was largely inconceivable that a priest or a minister would use their religion as a tool or a weapon in a political world and campaign. It was you know, pretty much inconceivable. But religion was viewed as, you know, they'd seen what happened in Massachusetts. Right? All the founders were in fact, Massachusetts almost didn't get admitted into the Union in 1789. Almost didn't get admitted. Because Massachusetts still had laws. They had to change their laws in order to become part of the United States. They still had laws that required you to tithe to churches, that required you to show up at church on Sunday, that if you didn't, they would come to your home and humiliate you, fine you, put you in the stocks. It varied from locality to locality in Massachusetts. But Massachusetts had been, you know, it was, you know, pretty fundamentalist, you know, the Puritans and the Pilgrims and all that kind of stuff. So in Jefferson's farewell address, he said, "Observe good faith and justice toward all nations. Cultivate peace and harmony with all. Religion and morality enjoin this conduct. And can it be that good policy does not equally enjoin it? It would be worthy of a free, enlightened, and at no distant period a great nation to give to mankind the magnanimous and not too novel example of a people always guided by an exalted justice and benevolence." And then he talks about what that means. Now, this is our first president. The speech was almost certainly written by James Madison, just, you know, for what it's worth. But although it may have been Washington, but this is our first president saying, you know, yes, we find morality in religion and things like that. And then he says, in the execution of such a plan, nothing is more essential than that the permanent, inveterate antipathies against particular nations and passionate attachments for others should be excluded. This is Washington's farewell address. He's saying, don't have allies, don't have enemies. And that in place of them, that would be enemies and allies, that in place of them, just and amicable feelings toward all should be cultivated. The nation which indulges towards another a habitual hatred or a habitual fondness is in some degree a slave. It is a slave to its animosity or to its affection, either of which is sufficient to lead it astray from its duty and its interest. Antipathy in one nation against another disposes each more readily to offer insult and injury, to lay hold of slight causes of umbrage, and to be haughty and intractable when accidental or trifling occasions of dispute occur. Hence, frequent collisions, obstinate, envenomed, and bloody contests. The nation, prompted by ill will and resentment, sometimes impels to war the government, contrary to the best calculations of policy. And he goes on from there. So there is that, right? That you know, religion actually can play a positive role because it establishes kind of a moral tone, says George Washington. Well, in the 1950s, the religious people were trying to take over government. I mean, it reached that point. And so members of the House and Senate got together and said, no, we don't want preachers running our government. And they passed an amendment to a tax bill. It's referred to as the Johnson Amendment by Trump and his buddies. Lyndon Johnson was one of the co-sponsors of it. It wasn't, I don't believe, referred to as the Johnson Amendment at the time, but, you know, hey, if you can pick on a former Democratic president. And what the so-called Johnson Amendment says is that if you're a church and you engage in political activity, then you're no longer a church. You're a political group.
And political groups pay taxes. Churches don't. So if you're going to engage in politics, church, pay taxes. Pay your damn taxes. And in the midst of this, we see this new tax bill that was just released by the Republicans, this 429-page proposed piece of legislation. And buried in there is a repeal of the Johnson Amendment. So churches can become overtly political. Now, 4,000, as I recall, let me just check that number. Yeah, 4,000, a group of more than 4,000 religious leaders from around the country wrote a letter in August opposing efforts to repeal the Johnson Amendment, saying it would harm houses of worship which are not identified or divided by partisan lines. And they're absolutely right. Religious leaders are saying, keep us nonprofit, because we don't want to be the arm of a party. We don't want to be the shills of a party. We don't want to be the tools of a party, and we don't want to be used by a party. But the Republican Party very much wants to exploit the Christian Taliban in the United States. And the Christian Taliban in the United States very much wants the political power that goes with getting into bed with the Republican Party. And this is not a new debate. Again, I refer you back to the correspondence back and forth between Jefferson and Madison when Jefferson was in Paris in 1787 as the U.S. envoy to Paris, and Madison was leading the effort in Philadelphia to write the U.S. Constitution. That was in August and September of 1787. In December of 1787, James Madison sent the first draft of the new Constitution to Jefferson, and Jefferson and he started this correspondence about things, and one of the things Jefferson wanted was that, there would be freedom of religion. And Jefferson's fear was that priests and ministers would end up running government, that government would start to dance to the tune of religion. Madison thought that was an absurd and silly concern. No politician would ever dance to the tune of a religious figure. It's just not going to happen. Now, Madison also was a Christian. Madison was, he was our fourth president and our first who, John Adams arguably identified himself as a Christian. But I think Madison was probably the first who actually practiced it. And Adams perhaps. But the thing is that's so fascinating is that Madison thought that it was possible that government could corrupt churches, which is why his first veto was a veto of legislation that gave churches money to care for poor people in Washington, D.C. And so Madison was concerned about the corrupting of churches. Jefferson was concerned about churches corrupting government. And it turns out they were both right. The churches have been corrupted. You got religious leaders like Pat Robertson who just are out there promoting the Republican Party, period, all the time. And so the churches have been corrupted by people in government, and government is now being corrupted by the churches. And I place Roy Moore as Exhibit 1. So anyhow, back to your calls. Kevin in Baltimore, Maryland. Kevin, what's up?
Hey, what's going on, Tom?
I'm here. What's on your mind, Kevin?
Hey, well, I've been holding on for a while. I called in to talk about, our party and how, the comments that Donna Brazile made. I understand that. I understand there's a lot of people in the party that's upset because Bernie wasn't a nominee, all that stuff. No matter how you look at it, Tom, this guy won by 78,000 votes throughout the states. And then you got to look
Actually, he lost by 3 million votes, Kevin. He lost the popular vote by 3 million votes. Donald Trump was not elected president of the United States. He was selected president of the United States by the Electoral College, an institution that was put into place to preserve slavery.
Exactly. And the thing that bothers me most of all is that any time, Tom, you have anybody that's helping out another campaign, it's almost like you're having 6 players on the floor when you're supposed to have 5. And when the 6th player just happened to be Russian. And if that team wins, you were assisted. No matter how you slice it and dice it, man, that's common sense.
Right.
And we need to get past this Hillary and Bernie thing, come together as a party, realize that Trump cheated. I don't care what anybody says. You're not going to convince me of anything else. The way they suppressed the votes in those states, the voters check that they were doing, all this mess, Tom, is geared up so he would win the electoral college.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the Democrats to say, "Hey, we got screwed by Chris Kobach knocking tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of active voters off the voting rolls in Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Indiana."
So I feel like this, Tom. I think that the leadership, the Democratic leadership, needs to get on the same page. And what I mean by that is, by no means am I saying that everybody's going to agree, that everybody's going to feel the exact same way about every person that's in the party. And everybody doesn't love Hillary, everybody doesn't love Bernie. We understand that. But look at what we have now. Look, and we're still bickering when we should be taking this guy out. Now, my issue with the party is that they're not coming out hard enough. They're not giving their constituents red meat like the Republicans did.
Yep.
And I'm telling you, Tom, what's happening now with Donna Brazile did, and it just disgusts me. What she did to me, it's almost like throwing another monkey wrench into the gears. If you look at all the people that were out there protesting, all that energy, all that positive energy, man, we should be harnessing that, bringing people together.
Kevin, I have a different take on this. I think that Donna Brazile's effort and her article was an attempt to close the loop on this so that we can put it behind us. And it has certainly, in my mind, done that for me. I mean, the game was rigged. And yes, it was done in a way that was inappropriate and a year in advance. And that's the past. Let's just make sure that that past doesn't get repeated. Kevin, thanks for the call. Good to hear from you. Very, very excellent points.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We're going to check in with Talk Media News in about 5 minutes and continue taking your calls. And Richard Wolff will be with us at the top of the hour. And welcome back. Gene, watching Free Speech TV in Savoy, Illinois. Hey, Gene, what's up?
Hi, Tom. You are my idol.
Thank you.
Because of you, I keep sane during this crazy time in politics. I have actually two questions. The first one is, why hasn't anyone challenged the constitutionality of the Electoral College? Because it was based on the fact that they counted a human being as 2/3 of a vote.
3/5.
And it says in the Constitution that all men are created equal. They leave out women. But the second question
Well, hang on just a second, Gene. Let me answer your first question first. The Constitution doesn't say all men are created equal. The Declaration of Independence does. The Declaration of Independence has no legally binding impact or influence on the United States. It's a statement of separation from another country by a country that at that time did not exist. So that's that. So your second question was?
Second question is, if any of these people are prosecuted by Mueller and have to go to prison, can Donald Trump pardon them?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, this is
So
what
what's the
George
whole purpose of the whole thing?
George Bush Sr. pardoned, Cap Weinberger and a whole bunch of other people out of the Reagan administration who had been involved in Iran-Contra. Yeah, the president can pardon anybody he wants. So what was your question?
Well, I mean, so I think it's sort of like a circus. I mean, you're going through all this, you're spending taxpayers' money.
Okay. Well, we're doing it.
Get let go.
Yeah. Well, we're doing it, number one, because the truth would be good to know, right? I mean, Nixon never arguably paid for his crimes, but we knew the truth about them, and so that's
the problem.
That's a good thing for the country.
The problem is, if this is true, why would they give up Donald Trump if they know he's going to pardon them? Why would they want to say, "Yeah, we did"?
Well, I think that's the math that Paul Manafort is doing right now. The reason he hasn't flipped is because he thinks. I mean, Manafort's been tight with Trump for decades. He bought an apartment in Trump Tower, just so he could live right next door to Donald Trump, or just above or below him. And Manafort is a major player. And I'm guessing that Donald Trump will pardon Manafort. I'm guessing that Manafort's bet is probably going to be a good bet. Whether his business partner, Mr. Gates, can say the same is kind of problematic. And, you know, I think that that's what's going on over there in the White House right now, is that everybody who is potentially the target of an investigation is asking themselves, am I close enough to Donald? Am I high enough in the food chain that he will pardon me? And one of the things that we've seen with regard to Donald Trump and the people around him is that he has no problem throwing people under the bus. And that's got to be causing a lot of the people in the White House to go, uh-oh, maybe he won't pardon me, you know? So,
why wouldn't he, though? He can't be heard. It sounds like we're going to have an impossible task to impeach him.
well, if Manafort is convicted and if he is sent to prison while Trump is still president, then, you know, I mean, then he would have to issue the pardon if he wants to do the pardon. And if that is before the 2018 or the 2020 elections, it actually will hurt Trump. It will hurt him electorally to have issued those pardons. That's typically why presidents issue the majority of their pardons the day they leave office, so that there will be no political downside to them. So, you know, again, that goes into the equation, Gene. Gene, I got to run, but thank you for the call. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Dave in Buffalo, New York. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today? Oh, Victoria Jones. Oh, that's right. Hang on just a second, Dave. Where is Victoria? There she is. Victoria Jones with Talk Media News. Hey, Victoria, what's going on in the world today? Let me do the setup here. Let's check in with Talk Media News to find out what's going on in the world. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, Ellen Ratner's new book. Now, Victoria Jones. Sorry about that. What's going on in the world? Hey, Victoria.
Hey, Tom. Well, happy Guy Fawkes Day on Sunday, which I hope you're planning to celebrate with a bonfire, burning of the guy, and fireworks appropriately.
Oh, I guess we will have to, yes.
Yes, you will. And just a quick sidebar before we get into all the very serious news. I was on the BBC News website, BBC World website, and there was a breathless story about how sparklers, which are those fireworks, you know, you hold in your hand and they put off little sparkles.
Right.
There is an American state in which sparklers are illegal, but guns are legal.
Right. I read that article actually this morning. Or I saw the headline. I didn't read the article. I don't. Which state was it?
Delaware.
Delaware. That's right. Yeah. In fact, there was a picture of Delaware up at the top. Yeah, you're right.
Yes, and I thought that's clickbait. And I thought, and sparklers are specifically mentioned in the law.
Right. Right. So, you know, we're figuring out things that can kill people are not a good thing to have, you know, abundantly in your society. But we haven't figured that out with regard to guns.
So the Republican tax reform bill has been rolled out, and I'm not going to go into the details of the bill because I haven't read it. No, I shouldn't think anybody has, although journalists are doing. It's about 420, 30 pages, but bits of it are popping up, and there are a couple of snippets that I'd like to share with you.
Go for it.
One is that right at the end of the bill is that it would allow churches to endorse political candidates, rolling back a 1950s era law that bars such activities. Yes, the Johnson Amendment.
Yes, this after 4,000 religious leaders petitioned Congress not to do that because they don't want to be pressured by politicians for endorsements, and they don't want to be in a position where they're raising money for or getting money from political parties.
Yes. So it does that. So that's going to be very interesting to see where that goes. It also would end a $7,500 credit for the purchase of electric vehicles. It also overhauls other energy-related provisions. So it would repeal the electric vehicle tax credit, which supporters have credited with reducing the price of emission-free cars and also helping the burgeoning American electric vehicle industry grow, and also for self-driving cars.
So the Republicans want to kill off one of our newest, most rapidly growing industries. And this in the time when China has announced that within 10 years they're going to ban the import or manufacture of internal combustion engines altogether. Norway announced the same thing. They're going to do it by 2023, fewer than 10 years from now. And other countries are doing the same thing. So while everybody else in the world is getting smart, efficient, and clean, we're getting stupid, expensive, and dirty.
But meanwhile, the Energy Secretary, this is a sidebar to this, the Energy Secretary said that while he was in Africa, he met with a young girl who told him that energy is important to her because she often reads by the light of a fire with toxic fumes. But she said that, but also from the standpoint of sexual assault, when the lights are on, when you have light that shines, Perry said, the righteousness, if you will, on those types of acts. And he said that using fossil fuel to push power into remote villages in Africa is necessary and will have a positive role on people's lives.
Sweet Jesus. This guy is such a shill. I'm astonished. Anyhow, Victoria, what else is going on?
The National Federation of Independent Business has come out against the tax reform bill, saying the legislation leaves too many small businesses behind, that the pass-through provision does not help small businesses. It would lower the top rate for income for pass-through businesses from 39.6% to 25%, but they say it's not going to help them mostly because of the way the tax is structured. I'm not going to go into details because it gets very dull.
Well, pass-through businesses, tend to be businesses that are throwing off enough cash that they're able to compensate the owner of the business in mid-six figures into 7 and 8 figures. I mean, hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars. And then, so some of the biggest companies in America are actually pass-through businesses. So, yeah.
President Trump and Republican senators agreed during a closed-door White House meeting this morning that they would not include a fix for DACA, for the Dreamers program, as part of an end-of-year spending bill.
Oh, my. So the Dreamers are just...
Obviously, it would not be included, Senator Tom Cotton said, in any omnibus or any other must-pass piece of legislation in 2017. Now, if they stick to that, it's going to likely set up some kind of end-of-year showdown with Democrats because they're saying they're going to demand a DACA fix either before or as part of the December government funding bill.
Remarkable.
Sam Clovis, President Trump's nominee to be the Department of Agriculture's chief scientist, withdrew himself from consideration today, the White House announced.
Yeah, as predicted. It's now that he is cooperating with the special prosecutor.
Yes, not having a background in science was not his reason.
Yes, of course.
It was the connection with George Papadopoulos, who struck a deal with the FBI for lying in connection with the Russia probe.
Yeah, and he was Papadopoulos' supervisor.
Yes. The operation in Niger that led to the deaths of 4 American soldiers was not a reconnaissance mission as initially described to U.S. officials, but instead a kill or capture mission conducted without additional support requested by Nigerian forces, according to 4 senior Nigerian officials. This is what ABC News is reporting.
Now, wait a minute. Did the Nigerian officials request no support, or did they request the capture and kill?
They requested additional support. The Nigerian forces did. They did not get it.
I see.
And it was a kill or capture mission for a very, very nasty terrorist called Dan Du. And it was never a reconnaissance mission, they say. Now, there's some disagreement about this. Some Americans quoted in the article are saying, well, it morphed into that. Whatever, it sounds like it was much more than a simple reconnaissance mission.
Right.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Medea Benjamin's new book, Kingdom of the Unjust, Behind the U.S.-Saudi Connection. And this is from the introduction. Through the women-led peace organization Code Pink, which I co-founded with Jody Evans after the 9/11 attacks, I have spent much of the last decade standing up against the U.S. military intervention in the Middle East and supporting local democracy activists. I traveled many times to the region, listening to human rights activists, marching with them in the streets, dodging tear gas and bullets, and getting beaten up and deported by government thugs. I have seen firsthand the deadly effects of U.S. foreign policies. The 2003 U.S. invasion of Iraq destroyed the lives of millions, including many of my dear friends, and unleashed the sectarian hatred that later gave birth to the Islamic State. I recall a conversation with my Iraqi colleague Yanar Mohammed, daughter of a Shiite father and a Sunni mother, and founder of the Organization of Women's Freedom in Iraq. When I asked her what was the most notable legacy of the U.S. invasion of her country, she gave the chilling response: we, Sunnis and Shia, learned to hate each other. In another part of the Middle East, U.S. military support for Israel has wreaked havoc on the lives of Palestinians and aroused the ire of people throughout the region. Continuous U.S. military interventions, from drone warfare in Yemen to overthrowing Muammar Gaddafi in Libya to funneling an endless stream of weapons into the region, have unleashed new levels of violence. But the United States is not the only nation whose massive footprint has been trampling on the lives of people in the Middle East. The other nation is Saudi Arabia, an oppressive monarchy that denies human rights to its own people and exports extremism around the world. It also happens to be the closest U.S. ally in the Arab world. During the 1980s and 1990s, I met intolerant and violent young men in Pakistan and Afghanistan who were trained to hate Westerners in Saudi schools. In 2001, I saw my own nation convulsed by an attack on September 11th that was perpetrated mostly by Saudis. Not hard to connect the dots behind the spread of the Saudi intolerant ideology of Wahhabism, the creation of Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, and the attacks in New York, Paris, Brussels, and San Bernardino. You can also connect the dots between Saudi Arabia and the failure of some of the historic uprisings associated with the Arab Spring, since the Saudi monarchy did not want calls for democracy to threaten its own grip on power. I was in Bahrain after Saudi tanks crushed the inspiring grassroots encampment in Pearl Square, where tens of thousands had gathered day after day to demand democracy. I will never forget the excitement of being in Tahrir Square during the Egyptian Revolution, then watching aghast as a military coup backed by the Saudis put some 40,000 activists behind bars. In Yemen, the Saudis took a direct military role in that nation's internal conflict with a ruthless bombing campaign. When I travel overseas, people often ask me why Saudi Arabia, a country that is so repressive internally and overseas, is such a close ally to the United States. Iranian friends want to know why the U.S. government is so outspoken about human rights violations in Iran, but silent about the worst abuses in the Saudi kingdom. Yemenis want to ask why my government supplies weapons to the very nation, Saudi Arabia, that bombed their schools and hospitals. Saudi women ask why the United States, which professes great democratic values, props up a regime that treats women as second-class citizens. The easy answer is oil, weapon sales, and other business interests. Oil has formed the basis for U.S.-Saudi ties.
The kingdom has become the largest purchaser of American weapons in the world, and hundreds of billions of Saudi petrodollars help shore up the U.S. economy. But there's another reason, perhaps more critical than any of the others. The American people have not demanded an end to this dysfunctional, toxic relationship. Why? In part, because the American people know so little about it. Even Americans who consider them parts of a peace movement know virtually nothing about the kingdom. The Saudi press is muzzled, foreign journalists are strictly monitored, and only tourists visiting for religious purposes are allowed into the country. Add to that a Saudi lobby that lines the pockets of U.S. think tanks, such as the Middle East Institute, Ivy League universities, such as Harvard and Yale, and influential institutions from the Clinton Foundation to the Carter Center. This checkbook diplomacy helps put a happy face on the abusive monarchy and silences its critics. So we have a lot to uncover. This book is meant to be a primer, giving readers a basic understanding of how the kingdom holds on to power internally and tries to influence the outside world. It looks at the founding of the Saudi state, the treatment of dissidents, religious minorities, women, and migrant workers, the spread of Wahhabism, the kingdom's relationship with the West, and its role in the region, and what the future might hold. As we delve into the inner workings of this dystopian regime, don't mistake criticism of Saudi Arabia for Islamophobia. This book is not a critique of Islam, but a critique of three intertwining factors that have shaped the Saudi nation: the extremist interpretation of Sunni Islam, known as Wahhabism, the appropriation of the Saudi state by one family, and Western support for this dynasty. Criticizing Saudi Arabia should not be equated with support for Saudi's nemesis, Iran. The Iranian government is guilty of some of the same abuses as the Saudis. Book Kingdom of the Unjust.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and on the line with us is Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, co-founder of Democracy at Work, author most recently of Capitalism's Crisis Deepens, Essays on the Global Economic Meltdown, democracyatwork.info, rdwolff2fs.com, and you can tweet him at Prof. Wolff, as in Professor Wolff. Dr. Wolff, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Tom. Glad to be here.
Great to have you with us. So tell me your thoughts on this new Jerome Powell, this guy that Trump says, or the news is reporting, Trump is going to nominate as the Fed chair to replace Janet Yellen.
Well, it's a little surprising on one hand and almost boringly tedious on the other. The surprise is that there's a bit of a tradition that if the economy is at least not in free fall, and you have a Fed chairperson who's been doing a reasonable job in a difficult situation, that you keep that person on. Janet Yellen, as a female, which is very, very rare in these circles, would have seemed in another time and with another president to have merited the continuation she didn't get. Instead, he's picked a banker, a man 100% by, of, and for the Wall Street insider, banker, millionaire, the very people he said he would get rid of, drain the swamp from, et cetera, et cetera. He's just, as he did with Steve Mnuchin and Gary Cohn and others, he's just, substitutes the bluster on the one hand and then goes to the banking big shots and puts them one after another in positions of power. If this Powell proposal goes through, that's what it'll be. He will also be one of the richest people ever. He's a multimillionaire, of course, and a banker. The last two heads of the Federal Reserve, Janet Yellen, Ben Bernanke, were academics, and the idea was get someone from outside the banking community to bring a different perspective, to bring some external supervision,
to make the running of the American economy, at least the monetary side, a little less of a in-house activity of the club of monster bankers. By moving out away from Yellen and substituting Powell, any pretense of an outsider is gone, and we're going to have one more Wall Street insider in a very, very powerful position to manage, control, and direct the American economy.
Yeah. Pretty much what you would expect, I guess.
Right.
from
I mean, at this point, the gap between what the man says, our president, and what he does isn't even any more surprising, because it really is quite a pattern. Lots of bluster, but in the end, he turns the government over to the very people he claimed he would never do the way his predecessors had. It turns out that whether you're Clinton or Obama or now Trump, the same people from the same circles, literally working for the same 4 or 5 big banks, are in there running the game. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, especially Goldman Sachs. I saw this report. The headline was "World Witnessing a New Gilded Age as Billionaires' Wealth Swells to $6 trillion." Is this a milestone or a landmark that we should all be noticing? What and why is it that billionaires having $6 trillion worth of wealth, which is what, about half the annual GDP of the U.S., if I recall correctly? I thought we're around $15 trillion. Why would that be a problem?
Well, you know, first of all, it is another Gilded Age. The term Gilded Age was coined to deal with the end of the 19th century, when you had the likes of J.P. Morgan and Carnegie and all those other super rich people, and who lived these fantastic lifestyles in the mansions on Fifth Avenue, and bailed out the American government when it had financial difficulties in return for being given even more fantastic wealth. And it was considered that this was, in the end, un-American. We stopped thinking of them as wonderful captains of industry and rechanged the name and called them robber barons instead. It wasn't that they were doing different things, it was a different time. And it was thought that we wouldn't do that again, that in the years in the middle of the 20th century, American capitalism justified itself on the grounds that it was making everybody middle class. So the significance of the fact that we are going backwards in terms of inequality, that we are, in fact, back in a Gilded Age of a tiny number of people making absurd amounts of income and accumulating absurd amounts of wealth. The problem is that this is very dangerous, especially in a society that had, as its previous period, this whole business about middle class, middle class, middle class. You're going to have to teach the American people, and the difficulties are already obvious, that all of that talk about capitalism generating a middle class isn't true anymore, that what capitalism is now stunningly able to do is to immiserate the middle class, get rid of most of it, and to concentrate the wealth that was once widely distributed in a tiny number of people in the gaudiest manner imaginable. And I think you're seeing, and I mean this in terms of the election of Trump on the right, of Occupy Wall Street and Bernie on the left, you're seeing the dissolution, the disillusionment as well of a system which promised the middle class onward and upward, and is now destroying it systematically. And that Gilded Age is therefore going to be, as it was in the 19th century, a bit of the calm before a storm of accumulated anger and rage about the deception, in a sense, that this system has practiced on the American people.
So we have about 2 minutes here left. Dr. Wolf, what should we be doing about this?
Well, I think we have to bite the bullet. We have to face the fact, either we want to live in a society that is extremely unequal in the distribution of wealth, or we don't. If all those wonderful stories about a great middle class, if that meant something to the American people, then they're going to have to take the steps to do that. And let me be real clear. I'm not in favor of redistributing the wealth. That only creates bitter struggles of the sort we are living through. The much smarter way, don't distribute it unequally in the first place. Set up businesses that don't distribute wealth in the crazy way that we do in our society now. That would be the beginning of a serious way to get at this problem.
So what do you do with somebody like, Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg, people who've gotten billions off our patent and copyright laws?
Well, you do the exact opposite of what the Trump administration is doing. If you saw the latest wrinkle, they're going to get rid of the estate tax, et cetera, and thereby create generations of this kind of wealth. You go the other way. You say to those people, you've had a wonderful life, you've accumulated a lot of wealth, but we believe in equal opportunity, and the way to do that is to let everybody start more or less on the same plane, and that requires us to tax estates at a high value so that we can get closer to a society that rewards effort and merit rather than one that creates, like the kings of ancient time, endlessly continuing generations of unequal wealth.
Yeah, but we have that right now. I mean, you have Paris Hilton and whatnot. It's
unbelievable. Yeah, and the latest thing I just saw, they're doubling the estate tax exemption from $5.5 to roughly $11 million. It's a joke, and it's phasing out all the estate tax over the next 5 years. That's the latest proposal from the Republican Party, and I think what you're seeing there is the commitment of that party, particularly, to create an endless elite of super wealth. It's not only not dealing with the problem, it's pretending there is no problem and there is no limit to where this inequality will be allowed to go.
Right, and that's a problem. Hang on just a second.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Dr. Richard Wolff. You can find his work at democracyatwork.info. You can tweet him at Prof. Wolf. Dr. Wolff, thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom.
Good talking with you. Welcome back. Glenn in New York City watching Free Speech TV. Hey, Glenn, what's on your mind?
Yeah, concerning this tax bill coming up, I thought that it would be a good idea, seeing how maybe they're going to do the nuclear option or something like that anyway, to put an amendment that after a $170,000 cutoff rate, will eliminate the cutoff rate. And they'll have to pay. It's basically a flat tax anyway.
You're talking the Social Security cap.
You have to pay it without any deductions. So why should they have a tax break?
Yeah.
Not only that, but if the bill does go through, you'll have enough money you won't lose the Medicaid. All that trillion, over some trillion to Medicaid, right. And this infrastructure bill coming up, you'll have money for that's all good jobs. We need to pay for that too.
Yeah, there's a lot of possibilities.
For everyone.
There's a lot of possibilities here, and I agree with you, Glenn. I think that doing away with the cap on Social Security payroll deductions would not only make Social Security solid and stable, and in fact allow Social Security to increase benefits forever, but it would also, diminish the problem that Professor Wolff was talking about, which is massive income inequality. I mean, it would only play a small role in diminishing that, but it would do it. So, Dave,
they're getting a free ride.
Yeah, no, I'm spot on. I'm with you, Glenn. Glenn, thanks a lot for the call. Ed in Lincoln, Massachusetts. Hey, Ed, what's up?
Hey, Tom. So it's the first time calling in. I want to say thank you and Professor Wolff. I learned a lot from watching you, and I think Professor Wolff has the best idea I've ever heard to save capitalism with democratizing the workplace. And that guy yesterday was a troll, and you are nothing like Rush Limbaugh.
Okay.
My question is, in my opinion, or to bring it up, my opinion, the two-party system doesn't really represent the political spectrum of our country, and I think it's contributing to the divide that we have. What do you think we can do to address the divide and to make the political spectrum more representative of the actual views of our people?
Yeah, just like with economics, it all comes down to the rules of the game. All right, prior to Reagan, we had set up the rules of the game of capitalism that you had to run a company in a way that actually benefits your employees and your community. Reagan changed that, so employees and communities are getting screwed right now. So, you know, the two-party system, you've got the rules of the game are that when you have an election, whoever gets the most votes wins. And, you know, which sounds logical. I mean, that's how, you know, our country was written into the Constitution. But what John Stuart Mill came up with, this brilliant idea in 1860 that was in his book on liberty, was the idea that if you have an election and one party gets 60% of the vote and another party gets 20% of the vote and a third party gets 5% of the vote and a fourth party gets 10% of the vote, that they should have representation in Parliament to the tune of 60%, 20%, 30%, or 5%, 10%, this is called proportional representation. And that allows for multiple parties. Right now, with first-past-the-post, winner-take-all elections, basically, you know, our electoral system has created a two-party system, whether we like it or not. So if you want to change the two-party system, it has nothing to do with the Democrats or the Republicans, other than that they would have to pass the legislation. It has to do with saying enough of first-past-the-post. We're either going to go for proportional representation or instant runoff voting. Ed, thanks for the call. We'll be right back.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
Hi, I'm Valerie with Free Speech TV. We're proud to provide you with independent, unfiltered news and documentaries. And as our valued viewer, you can help us continue bringing Free Speech TV well into the future. Join our Pearly Gate Rebels, our planned giving program. Your gift of any size will help ensure democracy endures through an informed citizenry. You can donate property, money, or assets. It's easy. My spouse and I are proud Pearly Gate Rebels. We're doing our part to ensure that Free Speech TV will be here to deliver thought-provoking news and information well into the future. Join us. Call 877-378-8669 or email me at valerie@freespeech.org. Rebel against media owned by billionaires and become one of our Pearly Gate Rebels today.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Dave in Buffalo, New York. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. Thank you. About crime and fighting it and how America does it. We fight crime by shooting and jailing our citizens. And how does Canada address crime? Well, they don't fight crime. They target crime. And they target crime with literacy. And they've taken a study back in 1990, and they did a study and showed, they tested the literacy of the people. And they extrapolated it out over their country. And they determined that the areas that had a high crime rate and recidivism and problems with they also address the victims and the general public. And what happens is that when they overlaid it, they found that the areas had low literacy rates and with high crime rates. And the way and so they address the people or the police by having them look at the communities and at the people that they're in front of, and they try and they school them in reading the people and how they deal with literacy and are they competent enough. And Canada describes literacy as the ability to understand and use printed information on a daily basis, which also includes math. And so what happens is that criminal offenders have a lower average of literacy levels than the general population. 2, neighborhoods with lower literacy levels have a higher crime rate. 3, witnesses with low literacy need help to communicate effectively, giving even reports, testifying later. And finally, literacy programs in prisons have resulted in positive outcomes, such as being able to maintain employment and reduce rates of reoffending.
So to summarize everything you've said, Dave, the other countries, particularly other advanced democracies, they don't fight crime, they prevent crime, and they do it by increasing literacy. Here in the United States, we're decreasing literacy. We're cutting school budgets. You know, Betsy DeVos on the job on this regard. And we're amping up our police departments. We're giving them more money. We're giving them more weapons. We're giving them weapons of war. We're doing the exact opposite of what you're describing, and on all the more the crime. Dave, thanks for sharing that with us. Mary Jo in Minneapolis. Hey, Mary Jo, what's up?
Oh, hi, Tom. When I saw this article in the New York Times the other day, it was October 31st, it was entitled, I thought of you, of course, Trade Group Calls for Tariffs on Solar Imports. And did you read that article? And
I did not.
What you thought of it?
I've not. No, I'm sorry.
Okay, so the Trade Association, let's see, it says, 4 officials from the U.S. International Trade Commission, an independent federal agency that governs trade, announced a range of recommendations Tuesday aiming at protecting domestic makers of solar equipment from unfairly priced imports, especially from China.
Right.
Those included limiting the imports of certain solar components and imposing tariffs of 10 to 35% on certain products.
Right.
Now, you know, the solar company called Solar World that used to advertise on your show, and from which I bought my 24 solar panels, actually it listed Solar World and Soniva as the 2 companies that supposedly went out of business. Solar World has not gone out of business and is not bankrupt at the moment. So I'm calling to hopefully maybe save these companies from bankruptcy.
Well, it's a weird catch-22, Mary Jo, because
what was that?
It's a weird catch-22 because for a company in the United States that is solarizing people's homes, right now the cheapest solar panels that they can buy are coming from China. But those solar panels are subsidized by the Chinese government. The Chinese want to end up being the world's solar producers. They want to drive everybody else out of business. And they're doing it the same way that they've done with industry after industry after industry. TVs, phones, shoes, clothes, you name it. They're doing it by subsidizing discount pricing. And so if we want to have an indigenous solar industry, if we want to have a made-in-America solar industry, we're probably going to have to do it with tariffs. On the other hand, when you impose tariffs on those imported Chinese solar panels, photovoltaic panels, what you're doing is increasing the cost to those solar companies in the United States. And if you do that at the same time that the Republican tax code is coming out and doing away with, for example, the subsidy, the tax subsidy if you buy an electric car, then we're kneecapping our own solar industry. So it's a delicate thing. And the Chinese, having a demand economy, they can simply say, okay, this is what we're going to do, and this is how it's going to get done, and we don't care who gets hurt or who benefits from it. This is what's best for the country. In the United States, we can't say that anymore because the Supreme Court has said that the business people who will be affected by these decisions, that they get to own the politicians, and the politicians can respond directly to them rather than to all of us. So, the question that first has to be answered is how important is it in the United States to have manufactured in the United States solar components? And if it's really important, then we need to go to a tariff system right away, even if over the short term it's going to hurt some businesses whose business model is bringing cheap stuff from China. On the other hand, if we decide that it's not that important to have a domestic industry, then we continue down the road we're at. I'm in the former camp, not the latter. Mary Jo, thanks.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this.
We're reading today in the Thom Hartmann University Book Club from Threshold, the progressive plan to pull America back from the brink. This is chapter 3, page 53. It's titled Population. Sometime between mid-2007 and mid-2008, China exceeded the United States as the single largest emitter of carbon dioxide, dumping an estimated 7 billion tons of CO2 into the atmosphere per year in 2008, compared with the U.S. estimated 6.2 billion tons that year. But China is a vast and populous country. On a per-person basis, Americans are still the most profligate producers of carbon dioxide, with the average American in 2008 directly responsible for around 19.4 tons of greenhouse gas, not to mention the portion of China's emissions that went to make products shipped to and consumed by Americans. Russia, with its less than modern industrial infrastructure, comes in second at around 11.8 tons per person. It's a cold country, and few homes are truly winterized. Then the European Union at 8.6 tons per person, and China at 5.1 tons per person. India, which is rapidly industrializing, is still one of the most efficient per-person nations in the world at 1.8 tons of CO2 per person per year. Although that's because much of the country is so poor they don't have cars, the winters don't require much heat except in the extreme north, and the focus of India's industrialization has been digital rather than manufacturing. The largest driver of all these processes that are tearing our planet apart and putting all life at risk is the increase in human biomass. There are roughly 1 trillion pounds of human flesh on the planet right now, and assuming a worldwide average food consumption of around 3 pounds per person, in the U.S. it's almost 5 per day, we're consuming around 7 trillion pounds of food per year. One result of this is that over half of the entire net productive capacity of the planet, the entire planet's ability to produce edible products from photosynthesis, is now used up, displaced, or wiped out by humans, leaving every other life form on Earth to compete for the leftovers. Our population growth has not been particularly even. In the first 100,000 years of human history, we averaged around 20 to 50 million people total. 60,000 or so years ago, as we moved out of Africa and began to cover the world, we crept up to a few hundred million by the time of Christ, 2,000 years ago. Around the time of the Crusades, when the world was, by most definitions, pretty well populated, we were coming into conflict with each other all over the world. There were only 500 million of us on the entire planet. Not long after the American Revolution, we hit our first billion humans on planet Earth in 1800. The second billion didn't take 165,000 years. We doubled our population in just 130 years, hitting 2 billion in 1930, just as the United States was sliding into the Republican Great Depression. But that economic debacle didn't slow the growth of human numbers. By the year JFK was sworn in, just 30 years later, the planet had added another billion humans. The growth in population was driven largely by cheap, abundant oil and fertilizer and pesticides made from it, the farm and transportation equipment fueled by it, and the processing, packaging, and distribution system made possible by oil that lets a person in Iowa have a lunch of tilapia fish grown in ponds in China, lettuce and tomatoes grown in Mexico, wine imported from France, and a fruit cup of berries imported from Chile and strawberries from Nicaragua. In this environment of relatively abundant food, even in the third world, our fourth billion took us only 14 years to add, 1974. Our fifth billion only 13 years, 1987. And our sixth billion only 12 years, 1999. As oil became more expensive, raising the price of food indirectly, since most of us are actually eating oil, population growth first began to slow in the first decade of the 21st century. Part of this was attributable to birth rate declines in developed countries, part to an explosion in the death rates because of TB and AIDS in the third world, part to famine and associated diseases in sub-Saharan Africa as deserts moved south due to global warming. But while growth is slowing, we're still adding people at a rate many times faster than just 3 centuries ago. Topsoil all over the world is vanishing. Transportation is becoming exponentially more expensive. And as human population density increasingly resembles the inside of a petri dish, diseases ranging from TB, more than 1 billion people are infected, and more die from that than any other cause worldwide, to AIDS, to the constantly mutating common cold and related corona and flu viruses, remember SARS, represent a menace that is dramatically amplified by the 1 trillion pounds of human flesh such diseases inhabit. We are not the first culture to reach this threshold of population versus resources. As I discussed at length later in this book, the Maori of New Zealand, a group of Polynesian explorers, are a prime example of a culture that, like the Europeans who discovered America, thought they had found a land of unlimited wealth and food, but ultimately learned that there is a limit to growth, the biosphere, and that when you unthinkingly hit that limit, life can become hellish and democracy nearly impossible. But the concept of a limit to growth, or a finite world, was largely unknown to the classical economists on whose assumptions, formulas, and work our modern economy is organized. In fact, the classical and neoclassical economists, from Malthus to Jean-Baptiste Say to Marx to Friedman, would suggest that the Maori hit the limit not of their biosphere, the ability of the land of New Zealand to produce food, but of their technology. They would correctly point out that today New Zealand houses several million more people than it did when that island nation was entirely populated by Maori. And modern technology has ensured that not only is there enough food, but that surplus agricultural land has been turned to a growing of fuel and medicinal crops. The book is Threshold. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. Matt in Lawrence, Kansas. Hey, Matt, what's on your mind today? Matt just vanished. Roy in Corpus Christi, Texas. Hey, Roy, what's on your mind today?
Well, Tom, I'm sitting here as a progressive curmudgeon trying to figure out how much of the damage being done to our country by our current president can be undone. And the only thing I can come up with some judges that he's appointed that are going to long outlive me. But other than that, can you please tell me what Trump is doing now that we can't fix if we can get rid of him?
The only thing that I would fit into that category, Roy, or the two things that I would fit into that category would be the long-lasting DNA-level damage that is being done to American children by, is it called Peripheros, the pesticide that the Trump administration just undid the Obama administration's ban on. It damages children in utero. And where are the right to life people, by the way, the forced pregnancy people? You'd think that they'd be flipped out about this. The DNA level damage that's being done by some of the other chemicals that are being dumped into our environment. So that's the domestic side. And then internationally, I'd say the damage that's going to be much harder to undo would be if Trump were to get us into a war with North Korea or something like that. I mean, we could sterilize the planet. There are many, many points of no return that Trump could take us past. And then third, I guess, is the global warming thing. We don't know where the tipping points are when the global climate system reaches the point where no amount of geoengineering, no amount of stopping fossil fuels is going to stop the progress, for lack of a better word, of the Earth heating up, and that at some point the permafrost starts to melt, the methane in the seas starts to melt. We've got all kinds of things that add together, and you end up with a mass extinction. But broadly speaking, Roy, your main point is that politics are politics, and what Trump has done can be undone by a good president, and I would say that's absolutely true. Look what FDR did in contrast to what Harding, Hoover, and Coolidge had done before him, for example. So, yeah, there you go.
Light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, indeed. Roy, thanks for the call. Good to hear from you. Butch in Delavan, Wisconsin. Am I saying that right, Butch?
Yeah, it is.
Yes. Can you hear me?
I do hear you just fine. What's on your mind?
Hey, I love your show, but you raised my blood pressure a few minutes ago.
How so?
Yeah, down in Brazil is somehow burying the hatchet between Bernie and Hillary supporters.
Well, what she's doing is outing the merger of the Hillary campaign and the DNC a year before it should have happened. And that's a procedural thing, but it's a big deal procedural thing. And, I get it, and I'm not, like I said at the beginning of the show, I understand that both the Clinton campaign and the DNC thought there's no way that Hillary Clinton, that anybody other than Hillary Clinton is going to be the nominee, and therefore let's get a jump on this thing. Let's win this election. Let's really make this happen. And that that's what motivated that in my mind. But but it shouldn't have happened, and it shouldn't happen again. And frankly, I doubt it will. Butch, your thoughts?
Yeah, my thought is that I want my money back.
Yeah.
I donated a lot of money to Bernie, not to get. I feel like they took me up in the woods and made me say "we." You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well,
they can't do that to us, man.
Yeah, I'm with you, Butch. And if you'd given money to the DNC, you might have a little more of a claim than giving money to Bernie. But I get it. But that said, it's in the past, right? It's over. It's happened. It's dead.
And we need to be moving forward. Butch, thanks for the call. Joy in Thompsonville, Illinois. Hey, Joy, what's on your mind?
Hi.
Hey.
Can you hear me?
Just fine, Joy. What's on your mind?
Oh, okay, great. Tom, I'm sorry, but I have a bone to pick off, so this is your day. I also am upset because I just heard this morning from Jordan on the Young Turks about Donna Brazil's confession. She's got a book coming out. I guess that's why she's confessing. But I don't care why. I know the truth now, and she is confirming the truth that everyone thought, that the primary was rigged in 2016 for Hillary.
Right.
And you see, I cannot think that a corrupt party is going to turn over a new leaf and in 2020 that, oh, they're going to do a good job and they're going to let the liberals in, because at this moment they're kicking them out of the party.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, I know you've got a great show here. I love free speech. I recommend it to everyone on Facebook, and I know, I tell them the channel number and where I find it. But, we need Bernie now, and they took that away from us. And that corruption, how can you undo corruption? Because
You can't, Joy. You can't undo it. You learn from it and you move forward. You correct the problem. You solve the problems. This was a corrupt deal between the Clintons and basically between Robbie Mook and whoever was running the DNC, Debbie Wasserman Schultz. This was a deal between Robbie Mook and Debbie Wasserman Schultz. And Donna Brazil comes out and says, I knew nothing about it. Debbie Wasserman Schultz did a crappy job running the DNC. It shouldn't have happened. She's just laying it out. But I do think that I can dismiss it. You're saying I can't just dismiss this, Joy. I think that we can. We can say, okay, here are the reasons this happened, and I understand those reasons. I don't approve of them, but I understand them. And it shouldn't happen again. We can't allow this to happen again.
But what about the rule of law?
This isn't a law. This was. I'm not even sure it's a rule in the DNC. If it was, I think that would be pointed out.
It's in the charter of the DNC that they are to be neutral, and they weren't neutral.
Well, that's the theory. That's the theory. I'm not sure that is at law, and I'm not sure that that's written down. But that's certainly how it should be, Joy. And I very much hope that it becomes that way. But you're right. I mean, this was the insiders taking advantage of their inside position and trying to nail down an election. And had Hillary Clinton got elected, and we wouldn't be probably having this conversation right now. Sean Hannity would be having this conversation. But it is what it is, and the best we can do, Joy, is learn from it and move forward. And that's what I'm absolutely committed to doing. Joy, thank you for the call. JP in Marietta, Georgia. Hey, JP, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, it's so good to talk to you again. We spoke just a little bit after the special election in Georgia.
Thank you.
But very quickly, my boss was listening to Rush Limbaugh the other day, and a guy called in with a great point. He said, I'm a conservative, and I know that the 1% pays 80% of the taxes, but their money comes from somewhere. And I unfortunately didn't get to hear Rush's response, but I thought it was great because, of course, everybody, has to pay their phone bill, pay their Comcast bill. It's these people's companies' services and goods that are giving them the money a lot of times. But my main point, you and Richard Wolff speak about capitalism a lot and what comes after, and the potential or what I see, and I think he sees as inevitable collapse of capitalism, since we've got this kind of infinite growth assumption that we have to keep up with to assume that GDP is going to always increase.
We're reaching the cancer stage of capitalism, in my opinion.
Yes, absolutely. But I guess my main question is, what have you heard of Jacques Fresco and the Venus Project with the a resource-based economy where our basic needs and goods are provided to us?
I'm not familiar with that person. Or that theory, but do you want to explain it? Or
it is something that is we would want to do for basically the entire planet, and it's based on as sustainable of, you know, energy production, you know, trying to harness solar, wind, geothermal, you know, tidal and wave power, basically everything as a regional thing, of course. So, you know, if it's very windy, you know, wind power, places on the coast will use a lot more, you know, of the tidal and wave power, stuff like that.
Right.
But it basically
that just seems to me like common sense, JP.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But yeah, I think it's a great way to move, and that could free us up, because I think right now, you know, I hate the world that science has to live in because of the profiteering and the capitalism of science. You know, people will say, oh, you know, science has brought us these, you know, the drugs that kill us and all these other things, and I'll have to say, no, it's the deregulation, you know, of these drugs, and the fact that these companies absolutely have to turn a profit, you know, that is making the bad parts about, you know, what could be considered science, I guess. But basically, if we try to focus our science towards these production increases, you know, making sure that everybody has enough food, has enough energy, and then people could almost do what they want to in the way that they would think, you know, would best benefit themselves, benefit, you know, everybody as a whole and as a species.
Yeah, there's sort of a first principles thing here, and that is, you know, food, shelter, healthcare, transportation, some just basic needs that when they're met at the level of community infrastructure, when these basic needs are met at the level of the entire community, then, you know, democracy flowers and quality of life improves. And when they're not, then you've got the disaster we have here. JP, thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back with more of your calls after this. Welcome back. Michael in Los Angeles. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thanks for taking my call. I just have a quick, kind of a quick rant and a comment, or a question, if I may. Forgive me, my voice is a little hoarse. As far as this whole Donna Brazile, the DNC thing, I'm a member of my Drinking Liberally chapter in my local LA County Young Democrats chapter here in Los Angeles, and we still have this, every time I go to a meeting or every time I go to one of these things, we still have this bit of infighting between us about this whole thing about, you know, what happened during the primary and everything else like that. Right. And in all honesty, I am a Hillary Clinton apologist. I do think she was treated unfairly during the election, and during the whole process, she was kind of looked at unfairly. And in my personal opinion, you know, Hillary Clinton kind of being and Debbie Wasserman Schultz and all them being lifelong Democrats and fighting for the party, you know, throughout the entire process has a lot to do with why they may have had somewhat of an idea of her kind of being the next candidate. But and I think it's just a little unfair. But my question for you is, what exactly did the DNC and all of them do to kind of, quote unquote, put their thumb on the scale in favor of Hillary Clinton?
They cut a deal, and I would encourage you, Michael, to read the article that Donna Brazile wrote. It's in Politico, at Politico.com. It's right up at the top right now. But basically, the deal was that Robbie Mook and Debbie Wasserman Schultz signed an agreement, essentially, in 2015. And that agreement said that the Clinton campaign would pay off the debts of the Democratic Party, and in exchange for that, the Democratic Party wouldn't do anything without approval of the Clinton campaign. So Donna Brazile, for example, talked about how even when she wrote a simple press release on behalf of the DNC, it had to be run by the Hillary campaign in Brooklyn before it could be approved. So basically what happened was a full year before the primary election happened, the entire mechanism of the Democratic National Committee was taken over by the campaign for one candidate and was turned into basically a surrogate for that candidate. And that's not a fair or reasonable thing to do. And I would say that's not a fair or reasonable thing to do. Now, as I said earlier, the reason why this doesn't fry me as much as it may others, or as as it may somebody who is looking at this without context, is that at the time that Robbie Mook and Debbie Wasserman Schultz made this deal, Bernie Sanders wasn't in the race. To the best of my knowledge, nobody was in the race. You know, Martin O'Malley came into the race later on, and Bernie Sanders, but you know, nobody thought that these guys even had a 5% chance, even a 1% chance.
No.
And nobody in the DNC thought that. Nobody in the Hillary campaign thought that. If I thought that this was an attempt by Hillary and her campaign to prevent the rise of a Bernie candidate or anybody else who might challenge her, I would be a whole hell of a lot more pissed off about it.
Right.
Forgive my language. Than I am looking at it from this point of view. You know, I see this as, okay, we're going to bend the rules, but we're going to do it in order to win an election, and nobody's going to get hurt. I really believe, and I could be completely wrong. Louise always says, you know, Tom, you always look for the good in people. Well, you know, what can I say? But I really think that that's the rationale, that that's what they were thinking. The tragedy is that 6 months or a year into it, when Bernie was actually a viable candidate, they didn't step back from it. That was the point at which Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Robbie Mook should have said, you know, this deal we cut, it's not appropriate. We're going to back away from this. And they didn't do that. And that's pretty grotesque. But again, I'm not sure that reflects on Hillary Clinton. That this is what happens at the level of campaign. Michael, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. Hey, welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Stephen in Ovida, Florida. Am I saying that right, Stephen?
Hello.
Hey, Stephen.
No, this is Jeremiah in Pennsylvania.
Oh, really? How did that happen? Okay.
Okay.
Well, Jeremiah, what's up?
You had said, caller had said that the American people are dumb, and you said they're not dumb, they're just uninformed.
Or malinformed, yeah.
Yeah, I agree that they're uninformed, but I think they're also dumb, because if they weren't dumb, then all we would have to do is just inform them, and, you know, life would be golden. But if you inform them, that's the surest way to lose. You know, you can't just give them the information.
Yeah, no, I disagree, Stephen. I was driving into Portland the other day, and it just amazed me. I mean, just thousands and thousands of cars, you know, funneling their way into Route 5 and coming out of it, and all this traffic moving around and all this stuff. And there are people who didn't graduate high school. There are people who have PhDs. There are people who have high IQs and low IQs. There are people, you know, and somehow. Yeah, you know, every day there is traffic accidents, I get that, but broadly speaking, it all works. We have tremendous intelligence. We have tremendous capabilities. We as a people, we as a human race, we as a collection, you know, of political people. I think this idea that Americans are stupid, or any nation, you know, for any nation to look at their people and say that they're stupid, that's the kind of idea that is typically promoted by authoritarians. It's the kind of idea that's typically promoted by people who say, oh, you know, I'm the one who should be in charge. I'm the only smart one here. All those dumb people, they just have to do what I say. And that, or, you know, an autocrat would say that kind of thing. And I don't buy it. I think that people are believing things that are not true because they're being told those things by right-wing hate radio and Fox News. Fox News and right-wing hate radio are telling them those things because the billionaires like Rupert Murdoch and the very, very wealthy people who own the radio networks and the hosts are being spiffed hugely by particularly far-right polluting industries. And so, you know, people are being told things that are simply not true. And, you can't blame them for believing things that they think are true, particularly, the average viewing age of a Fox News viewer is 70. These people grew up in a time prior to 1987. They grew up at a time when the news actually could be believed. In fact, it had to be able to be believed because if it wasn't credible, if it wasn't actually the news, radio and television stations lost their licenses. And, Reagan changed all that. And so now you've got news that's infotainment and news that, in the case of Fox, and go to MediaMatters.org every single day, or foxhounds.us, or newshounds.us, every day you can see how Fox is lying to people. I mean, they just lay it out. It's breathtaking. And the really frightening thing is that one of the people that Fox News is lying to most aggressively is the President of the United States. He's watching Fox and Friends every morning, and he's tweeting out lies and half-truths based on the lies and half-truths that Fox News is presenting, and that concerns me. Stephen, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Sabrina in Nottingham, Pennsylvania. Hey, Sabrina, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to know if you were familiar with Christian Felber's book, Change Everything, Creating an Economy for the Common Good.
I am not.
It is so fantastic. I hope that you can follow up and
Can you summarize it in a few sentences?
Yeah, the goal of the economy is no longer endless greed, but the common good, and it's based on human value needs, and they use a common good balance sheet where high points are given to the promotion of several values such as democracy, justice, solidarity, and so forth. And companies and corporations gain these points and get rewards by things like lower taxes, product promotion, let's see what else, less expensive loans. So the goal of the economy really is for the common good, and it's just the most fantastic book. I have a small progressive think tank I run out of my home, and we're talking about this, and I just wanted to get it out there.
Cool. So once again, the author and title?
The author is Christian Felber. He's Austrian.
Okay.
And the name of the book is Change Everything, Creating an Economy for the Common Good. And it's being used all over the world, in towns, in corporations, in countries. And it's fantastic, so I hope you can look into it.
Cool. Sean, let's keep an eye out for that, okay? Change Everything. Thank you, Sabrina. I appreciate the call. Mark in Niles, Illinois. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Good to talk to you again. This ties in with what Sabrina was just saying and JP earlier. I want to throw out my definition of an economy, which is the circulation of money, goods, and services. And if it doesn't circulate, you don't have an economy. It's just some people have stuff and other people don't.
Right.
And then if you can get into an idea like Sabrina was just saying, what you have an economy for, why do you have, that circulation going on? Are you going to promote good things that go along with it or not?
Yeah, I mean, this is you have to ask the question, why do we create an economy? Republicans act like economies are acts of God. They're not. They're acts of government. Governments create economies by creating currency, by stabilizing the currency, by creating a court system that can enforce contracts, by setting up the rules for contracts, by having jails and police officers who can actually enforce contracts and agreements. An economy is created by government. And so then the question becomes, why is government bothering to create an economy? And the answer historically has been for the common good. Adam Smith wrote an entire book about this. And I'm not talking about Wealth of Nations. It's his other book, which is The Moral Theory of Moral Sentiments, was Adam Smith's book on this topic. And it's brilliant, and it needs to be revisited, and we need to realize as Americans that, economies are set up, there's nothing magical about them. It's like a football game. You set the rules of the game, and if you're going to say there can be 20 players on the field or 10 players on the field or whatever, however you set up the rules, that's how the game is going to end up being played. And we have recalibrated our rules since the 1980s to say that, rich people can do no harm, basically, and they never have to go to jail again. And it's a terrible, terrible mess. Anyhow, thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us kicking in, participating, being there. Get out there, get active, tag your end. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com.